Chapter 621, The Battle in Beishi Forest. The only good news was that this person's damage was not particularly frightening despite his accuracy with his shots, so Royal God Call was still well even after taking that arrow. These experts had truly been in Gu Fei's company so much that they had developed the habit of only viewing damage that could result in insta-kill as frightening. Actually, how could it be so easy for people to insta-kill others in games? Even if Gu Fei did insta-kill plenty of people as of date, he would still need to rely on his double revolution twin incineration to deal enough damage to achieve this. Even though Royal God Call was an archer with scarce HP, he was still an expert possessing powerful equipment and ranking high on the leaderboard. This was especially true after he had purchased 2 more top-tier equipment using last night's 250,000 gold coins. While he might not be an existence that defied logic like Gu Fei or Svelte Dancer, it was completely impossible to insta-kill him at any rate. The assailant this time had actually used his snipe, but that had only taken off only a quarter of Royal God Call's total HP. His damage isn't that high, I only lost a quarter of my HP. He sighed in relief to the others. TSK. War Without Wounds immediately thought nothing of it. If that archer's single shot of snipe could only take away a quarter of Royal God Call's HP, there were even fewer reasons for him to worry. While the members of Young Master's Elite sighed in relief, the eyes of Southern Lone Blade's gang nearly fell out of their sockets when they heard it. The eyes of these larcenists were sharp, and they could more or less gauge a Royal God Call's stats through a glance at his equipment. For someone like him to lose a quarter of his HP with a snipe but comment that the enemy's damage was not that high. Although they did get insta-killed a lot by Gu Fei before, the mentality of Southern Lone Blade's team had yet to be warped to such a degree, so their judgment toward a player's damage was still within the realm of mortals. To them, Gu Fei was a unique existence, not yet fully accepting him as a normal person like what Sword Demon and the others had done. Charge. Seeing that the enemy was incapable of dealing insane amount of damage, War Without Wounds no longer continued to advance in a serpentine motion and decided to bravely charge forward. There were only 3 players up on that builder, while they had more than a dozen of experts on their side. What would people say if they were still afraid in such a situation? With Gu Fei taking the lead in this charge, while the 2 thieves, Sword Demon, and Blackwater, had slipped off under the cover of their stealth, the others maintained their positions as they advanced to the large boulder, mainly concerned over running too far outside the range of their priests. The average player would be reprimanded for attempting something so pointless like what Gu Fei was doing now, disregarding his party and not coordinating with the others. But this was Gu Fei. Everyone could only be envious of him. What else could they really say? The team of experts continued to push forward. The 2 archers in their team, Glue and Royal God Call, returned fire, pelting that large boulder with their arrows. On the opponent's side, Broken Water Arrow and that other archer no longer dared to be as high-handed as before with their projectiles, substantially reducing the amount of shots they were taking. Ambushing us with just so few men? Everyone could not help but wonder in their heart. They watched as Gu Fei reached the large boulder. These men felt that this skirmish was about to end and they were all just waiting for Gu Fei to blink and send them on their merry way back to their respective spawn points once he got up onto that large boulder. Just as they were contemplating this, the charging Gu Fei suddenly darted to the left, and the moonlit nightfalls in his hand flicked out a streak of flames to his right. The air to his right blurred as a figure came bolting out, narrowly avoiding Gu Fei's slash with a sliding step backward. Then, with a flip of his right hand, the thief produced a short crossbow seemingly out of thin air and let loose an arrow with a twang straight at Gu Fei. Gu Fei tilted his head to the side and dodged the shot, before attempting to perform a follow-up attack in response. That thief activated his fleet foot as he backed off, already running off at a movement speed far beyond the all-agility build Gu Fei's. Everyone, be careful. It appears that our enemy has brought more than just these few men this time. Young Master Han's gaze turned cold. Fleeting smile should of course be more than certain as to the strength of their force right now. Attempting to finish off Gu Fei's party with just 2 archers with decent marksmanship was just too naive. By the looks of things, there must be more to this ambush. Take care of your surroundings, Southern Lone Blade quickly reminded everyone after he saw Gu Fei fend off that sneak attack from a stealthed thief. Flames Singed Close waved his magic staff and tossed out a descending wheel of flames, a method often used by teams who lacked any means to counter stealth. Their left side was now engulfed in a sea of flames, yet no thief appeared. Flame-singed clothes followed that up with a blazing tree of 1,000 inferno to their right, and there was still no one appearing from the assault. Everyone was wondering to themselves when they suddenly saw arrows fly toward them from every direction. Crap! It's a trap! Southern Lone Blade bellowed as his team swiftly huddled themselves into a tight mass. This same moment, he was extremely worried that those hoodlums from Young Master's elite would split off into theirs and fight by themselves, but when he turned over and glanced at where those experts were, he saw that they had actually formed up even faster than them. War Without Wounds, Brother Assist, and Royal God Call were each standing upright, protecting young Master Han in the center. The four were closing in toward Southern Lone Blade's team, intent on merging with them to form one unit. Nothing needed to be said about Southern Lone Blade's team's caliber, either, and they absorbed the four into their formation readily, leaving the three priests and the mage flame-singed clothes protected in the chorus War Without Wounds, and Southern Lone Blade took to block the direction where the arrow fire was the most concentrated, while the knights quickly bestowed defense buffs to their crowd of teammates. At this point, everyone had a grasp of the situation they were in. This level 30 grinding map, called Beishi Forest, they were passing through on their way to Beishi City had quite the history. Beishi City was so named for its white rocks. It was unknown if all the trees in this city region had been uprooted and transferred to the neighboring city, Linian, but the fact remained that barely any trees were present in the surrounding area. Any player would call the terrain desolate in a glance, yet it was this wide desolate expanse, where gray boulders of varying sizes formed, that had become a landmark of sort, much like the 9,527 outcrop at the wilderness camp. Beishi Forest was a location where grayish-white rocks abounded. Yizia and the other two archers were sprawled on one such landmark boulder, with plenty of rocks in different sizes around them. These ambushers were using the surrounding rocks as cover while they waited for Gufei and his party to step into their kill zone before they mounted their ranged assault. Bait the enemy and ambush. It was a very simple entrapment method. Young Master Han very painfully lectured everyone. Comrades, look here, this is the harm of flaunting personal heroism. That's true. Everyone nodded in agreement. Had Gufei not charged out so quickly and recklessly for the kill after being ambushed, the rest of them would not have been in any hurry to give chase and subsequently fall for this trap. We should all put ourselves in his shoes. It's been forever since Miles has slain anyone. He's most likely lonely, War Without Wounds mused. Where's Eternal Dominion? Brother Assist asked. He realized that the man was not in defensive cluster of theirs. Isn't he over there? Look, it's another wannabe hero. Young Master Han was shaking his head repeatedly at this point. It was obvious that Eternal Dominion had no considerations for the team too. While they had all gathered together, the fighter continued to push forward headfirst to support Gufei. Everybody had reasons to believe that if it were not for Eternal Dominion not having a movement speed that matched Gufei's, he might very well advance on their enemies alongside him. The reason that they could still while their time away despite being encircled was that, after everyone had been struck by that first volley of arrows, they quickly realized that these attacks were not dealing much damage, despite their ambushers possessing rather ferocious firepower. Upon closer inspection of their surroundings, they noted that those players who had popped out from behind or on top of these scattered rocks and boulders, were not actually archers despite all of them using bows. Archers, especially the sharpshooters, were able to deal significantly more damage with their bows, and the inclusion of the ranged skills that they got for being one and the archer equipment they had that increased their bow aptitude meant the difference in damage from the average job class using a bow was incomparable to that of an archer using the bow. The job classes of these people who had ambushed young Master Han and everyone else might all hold a mixture of job classes, but all of them were wielding bows, so while they all appeared to be decent marksmen, their damage were not particularly notable because they lacked the job classes to back it. What made them all surprised, though, was the faces of these players, each looking absolutely weather-beaten. In the end, Royal God Call could not hold back his exclamation. Fuck me. Why are there so many old fogies this early in the morning? It was reasonable for him to make such an exclamation. After all, even though anyone could play online games, the youths were still the main consumer group that were targeted for their sales. Not many uncles in their 30s or 40s were playing this game to begin with. Adding that most people in those age brackets held jobs, they would essentially have to wait until nighttime, once they were done with work, before they could even get online and play such MMOs like Parallel World. Hence, coming across players from this demographic was truly a rare sight this early in the morning. Yet these veteran gamers could not help but be astonished that a whole bunch was ambushing them right now. These men had successfully unleashed their initial fierce volley, but seeing their targets still chatting and laughing as if they were not under attack, with no one even dying from this ambush, these uncles could not help but feel a little dejected. Yizia, who was still prone atop the large boulder, sighed. Without the support of the appropriate job classes, it's really tough to demonstrate the prowess of the bow and arrow. Beside him, the archer very gloomily added, there's no point even if they have the support of job classes. The arrows themselves are just too slow. Yixiao was downcast. We can't possibly make a gun in this game. If there were really guns in game, our ambush would be enough to kill off half of those guys in that first salvo, and they would be completely wiped out at this point. The man continued speaking. Even so, that was still a rather fruitful expenditure. If they don't think of a way to break out of their encirclement, there's no way for them to last, Yizia said. Have Old Lightning and Thunder figured out how to play their mage job class yet? Broken Water Arrow asked. The archer replied expressionlessly. Those two enigmas. It's not that they don't know how to play their job class. Rather, they feel uncomfortable shouting the spell incantation when they cast something. They'll get used to it after shouting more, Broken Water Arrow offered. Look, that's Old Lightning right there, yeah? The archer pointed in a direction. Broken Water Arrow turned to look and saw someone prone atop the rock. This person was originally firing with his bow and arrow, but because a mage using a bow would end up dealing minuscule damage, he eventually got fed up with it and stowed his bow in favor of his magic staff. Creeping closer with a few steps, his magic staff was pointed forward as he muttered out the words. A circle of flames appeared in midair. But those experts had abundant game experience under their belts. Right from the get-go, they had comprehended that their enemies were comprised of various job classes, so they all made sure to keep an eye on the mages possessing a ranged firepower. Having registered every move that man made, they took precautions against his eventual actions. The moment that descending wheel of flames appeared, everyone moved in unison to avoid it. Just as that mage was preparing to attack and knew after the first missed his targets, a thief appeared behind him, revealing a face that held a sinister smile, and gifted him with a deep stab of his dagger. For a group that had young Master Han commanding it, how could they simply bear the brunt of the attack without throwing in a few tricks of their own into the mix? This group standing out in the open, bearing the ferocious attacks of those middle-aged men, was young Master Han's attempt at turning Yixiao's strap onto himself. While everyone's attention and firepower was drawn onto the cluster of players out in the open, Sword Demon and Blackwater stealthed their way in under orders to turn this situation on its head by sneak attacking these ambushers, letting them carve out a piece off these interlopers. Blackwater did not know when he started inexplicably hating the mage job class, which was why he chose a mage as his target. After putting an effort to climb up this rock, he quickly plunged his dagger into the prone mage. Who would have thought that this mage would suddenly turn over, with his two legs kicking out to force Blackwater to reveal himself, though? Taken by surprise, Blackwater bent over and dove at the man with his dagger forward and butt facing the sky. There was no way that he could take back this attack now. All he saw was that old fogey's face chuckling darkly while reaching out his hands to grab a hold of Blackwater's two arms. With his right leg propped up on Blackwater's belly, this uncle gave it a forceful kick. A mage's strength was weak, but they would have no problems executing such a technique. Blackwater was sent soaring to that rock by this seemingly harmless mage, crashing headfirst into the ground as he ate a mouthful of dirt. Fuck, what's going on? Did Thousand Miles drunk possess him? Blackwater was in a state of confusion. He never would have thought that there would be a second mage out that could take him down so handily in close combat. What are you in a daze there for? Come back quickly. The team called Blackwater back. The thief was all alone now that he was revealed outside the encirclement, so he naturally became the focus of the enemy's aggression. Without the level of reaction time and skill that Gufei and Eternal Dominion boasted, how would Blackwater have any HP left when all the arrows came flying straight at him? Nevertheless, Blackwater's reaction time was not too terrible, so the moment he heard the shout, he came back to his senses and rolled out while activating his fleet foot, scrambling his way back over to the team as he made a break for safety. However, the marksmanship that the enemies boasted of was solid. Even when faced with such a quick movement speed, the uncles were still able to accurately hit Blackwater with every shot they made. The only thing worth rejoicing was that their damage output was hardly worth a sneeze, so even though Blackwater's equipment were hardly top-notch, it was at least above average, and with the inclusion of the team heading over to his aid at the same time, the three priests were able to work together and prevent him from turning into white light instantly. However, these MMO veterans could tell that they might be unable to ensure the survival of Blackwater even after all this. The damage he had sustained was beyond the healing output of the three healers put together. Southern Lone Blade wordlessly turned in that direction and charged out, with arrows landing on him at once. With a higher defense, and the sword and shield protecting him, he was much more resilient than Blackwater. Meanwhile, young Master Han also diverted some of his heals over to Southern Lone Blade, his skill leaving paddy scent pastures and verdant timber in awe. This level of control he was demonstrating made it such that letting him heal just one player alone would be too much of a waste. He would need to be given a whole troop of people to be used efficiently. Southern Lone Blade, who had very quickly reached Blackwater with that charge, helped provide cover for him before finally getting him back to safety. "What happened?" they asked. "I don't know, it's as if he detected me the moment I got near him." Blackwater was a little glum. "I'm afraid none of these people are easy to deal with." Young Master Han revealed a rare look of worry as he turned his gaze and pointed in a direction. "Let's move over there." "Then, what about Miles and Dominion?" everyone asked. "They can do whatever they want." Young Master Han shrugged as he sent a message to Sword Demon. "Don't be in a hurry to strike. These guys are not simple, after all." When the mage attacked, Blackwater got exposed and was subsequently kicked off the rock, requiring aid after. All this happened in an instant. Gufei was now dashing forward as he avoided the projectiles sailing through the air, not once noticing what was happening over there. His eyes were only on the huge boulder before him, and in the moment when he was about to cast his blink and get up, the sky darkened. Following which, a figure came swooping down like an eagle, a single raised leg kicking out at Gufei. "Don't take that swallow drop kick head on," bellowed Eternal Dominion. He was right behind him and could see it clearly. Gufei's kung fu expertise might be well tempered, but he never considered how there could be certain things that would affect the confrontation in this game. Take for example the swallow dropkick skill. It possessed a unique bonus effect, which was dependent on the height at which the user dropped from that positively correlated to the verdict of the skill. Furthermore, the damage would see a congruent increase with the attack's height. In other words, the higher the skill was unleashed from, the more powerful the skill became. Eternal Dominion was afraid that Gufei would be caught off guard by this unique effect. At this very moment, the assailant was plummeting down with his swallow dropkick several meters above the boulder, and there was a tremendous attack power behind this kick. As for Gufei, although his spell damage was ferocious, a mage's spell, which was deemed to be of lower priority by the system's verdict, would be completely suppressed. In the off chance that he was a second slower in insta-killing the assailant, this single swallow dropkick would surely stomp Gufei to his death. If not for this skill's bonus, this attack from above, where his feet were hardly in contact with the ground in the slightest, would be a huge taboo in a fight. With Eternal Dominion and Gufei's discerning eyes when it came to martial arts, they could easily tell that this player was no ordinary gamer from his form, so there was no reason he would not understand this logic. For this person to still opt for this method of attack, clearly showed just how fearless he was. The moment Gufei heard Eternal Dominion's caution, he did not directly contend with the attack like what he had originally planned. Seeing this man arrogantly relying on the game's skill like this, Gufei was also not to be outdone. He raised his hand, and with a single point of his finger, the man who was executing his swallow dropkick was abruptly stunned, for the Gufei below him had disappeared from his sight. "Behind you." Broken water arrow, still up on that large boulder, hurriedly cried out this warning. Gu Fei had actually used his blink to directly materialize in midair. Broken Water Arrow was already rather quick when he blurted that out, yet it was still not as fast as Gu Fei's sword, who swung out with a twin incineration while in midair. On the other hand, this fighter immediately experienced the disadvantage of not having his feet planted on the ground. When in midair, no matter how much muscle someone had in their abdomen and waist, or how fiercely and violently they twisted themselves, there was a limit to the degree and space that they could move, and that made it impossible for this man to dodge Gu Fei's calculated slash. That player did not die instantaneously after Gu Fei's twin incineration connected, and the man promptly rolled away once he landed in an effort to get out of Gu Fei's attack range. The man might have taken such a huge loss just from that single exchange of blows, yet he was neither in the least bit flustered nor astonished, which was an atypical response among gamers. If they were not already dead, most of those who had crossed swords with Gu Fei would often turn green or pale after realizing they had lost such a large chunk of HP from sustaining a single attack from him. However, this man did not react in the least bit from this. It was as if he had not noticed how much his HP dropped with that one cut. Gu Fei did not hesitate and rushed to where his opponent had rolled toward the instant he landed on the ground. With two twin incinerations and a single blink, the weakness of Gu Fei's pitiful mana reared its ugly head once more, so this one slash of his was not boosted with any spell. The opponent was not panicking when he saw Gu Fei's sword come sailing over to him. He twisted his body and staggered a step, but how was he to know that this dodge he had done was well within Gu Fei's expectations, who proceeded to modify his follow-up move and change the trajectory of his cut as his blade went slicing at the man. Finally, that fighter's passive expression changed. He had long realized that his opponent's skill was anything but simple, but he did not find it particularly difficult for him to avoid this slash again. With another twist of his body, he managed to pirouette away from the sword yet again. This time, he was not going to be passive and sent a leg whip over at Gu Fei as he twisted. The angle of this kick was huge, and it went directly for Gu Fei's head. The impetus of this kick was as furious and powerful like a lightning bolt, so it could be imagined that the force of it was enough to knock someone out cold if done in real life. Gu Fei did a diagonal sidestep as he turned his body to the side to avoid that blow, that sword in his hand twisted out for another cut. If this were in reality, Gu Fei would never do such a counterattack. Since this is a game, I guess I don't have to be too particular about things, he thought to himself even as he chanted his twin incineration spell. Standing somewhere behind him, Eternal Dominion was already left dumbfounded by what he had witnessed. Whoa! This is a game, alright. To actually use such a move, it's just too obscene. Everyone watched Moonlit Nightfalls carve out a stroke of flames, directly brushing past that man's crotch, which was now exposed thanks to his raised leg. Chapter 622, I Am a Scientist. Now that it was the era of peace, where society got along harmoniously, the interaction between martial arts practitioners was focused more on the technical side of things, so while it was inevitable for them to exchange punches and kicks, everybody would absolutely refrain from using some of the more overly vicious moves against one another. Take that move Gu Fei had just used. It was indubitably a forbidden move. If this move were to be executed in reality, the recipient's family line would end right there and then. In the event that the recipient was from a family that only imparted their martial arts to people related by blood, and the person had yet to have offspring, then this move of Gu Fei would literally sever a kung fu inheritance. The consequences would, thus, be disastrous. That was why Gu Fei had never used this sort of move in real life despite having knowledge of it. But what this meant was that he had no experience of using it in actual combat. Eternal Dominion, a fellow practitioner, was familiar with the situation himself, and it was precisely because of this that he was left in awe by what he had just witnessed. Seeing Gu Fei make a split-second judgment to use such a move he was unfamiliar with, that single too obscene he had uttered was his praise for Gu Fei's kung fu and nothing else. The opponent who had taken that slash was mortified, hopping to the side with his hands covering his crotch. The fire was already extinguished before the man could even put it out himself. Having been taken advantage of twice in succession, the man finally no longer dared to underestimate Gu Fei at any degree. Gu Fei was also very astonished. The man had eaten 2 twin incinerations of his, yet he was still looking hale and hearty. He was just a fighter, and Gufei could tell from his dexterous jumps that the man had invested quite a bit of agility to his character. There could only be a single explanation as to how he could survive 2 slashes of twin incineration. The man had equipped fire-resistant gear. Looks like this man is here solely to deal with me. Gufei lifted his head with this thought floating in his mind and saw a fleeting smile gazing down at him from up the large boulder. Next to him was Broken Water Arrow, and the other player, whose name he did not know. Both men were holding short crossbows, firing off shots at Gufei whenever there was a window of opportunity. Gufei had already used up all his mana at this point, and was no longer able to cast a single twin incineration, yet he remained unfazed. Lifting his head to casually glance up at the 3 men, he turned to face the opponent standing before him, who was still clutching his family jewels. How should I address you? Compared to them, Gufei preferred someone who enjoyed getting up close and personal to fight. That man gathered himself ever so slightly as he somberly answered, Mountain Breaker Axe 1. Broken Water Arrow, Mountain Breaker Axe. All these IGNs sounded as if they were part of a series. Nodding, Gufei asked, are you a friend of Old Broken? That man did not deny this, answering, a war buddy. Indeed, Gufei could tell that these people were all a cut above the rest. Just from how these people were holding ranged weapons despite having different job classes shows their natural disposition. They're very used to wielding firearms to engage enemies from afar. Looking at the age of these players, with the youngest seemingly in their 30s and the majority being over their 40s, all looking grizzled and world-weary, Gufei was led to believe they were most likely a bunch of retired soldiers. Never would he have thought Fleeting Smile could gather such a bunch. Gufei involuntarily lifted his head and swept his gaze over to the man, his eyes dancing in joy. You've really gone to the effort for this, haven't you? With that, his eyes went back to regard them all. Are you guys coming up one by one or all together? Eternal Dominion hurriedly dashed over. Don't be so arrogant. I'm not being arrogant, Gufei calmly refuted. There are 4 of them, and one of which is entirely negligible. With the 2 of us here taking on the 3, do you think that's being too arrogant? You've included me into the equation? Eternal Dominion was surprised. Gufei was even more nonplussed. Then, what did you run up out here for? Eternal Dominion was momentarily at a loss for words. Mountain Breaker Axe laughed. Young man, you're really brimming with self-confidence. Gufei laughed along. You're Old Breaker, aren't you? Come, let us spar and compare notes. Great. Mountain Breaker Axe nodded. Up on the boulder, Fleeting Smile waved his hand out and restored Mountain Breaker Axe's HP with his heel. Gufei was discouraged. You've got heals, huh? Well, I've got mine, too. With that, he pulled out an apple and was about to munch on it when it abruptly burst apart in his hand. Gufei turned to look at the unknown archer. Is eating an apple against the rules? That man shot an arrow right at the apple before Gufei could even take a bite off it, evidently proving that his marksmanship was no trivial matter. But this archer was more surprised with how calm Gufei was being. The latter did not even flinch when the former released that shot, which meant that he could distinctly determine that the arrow was shot at his apple, and nothing else. Furthermore, this composure also demonstrated that, even though Gufei was up against Mountain Breaker Axe, he was not lowering his guard against the others. There was no way an arrow from him would be of any threat to Gufei at such a distance in this game. That was when Mountain Breaker Axe got into his stance. Let me witness the depth of the skills of martial practitioners such as yourselves. Gufei was about to approach when Eternal Dominion snatched the rug from right under him and leapt out. If you please. Gufei sighed. Before he could say another word, Eternal Dominion took the initiative to leap forth and greet Mountain Breaker Axe with a punch. They were both fighters, so their general stats and strength were about the same, hence, there was not much hesitation like Gufei would have if they fought. Their blows directly collided with each other, looking as if they were having a jolly good time letting their punches fly. However, Gufei knew that this was not a technical sparring between martial arts practitioners right now, but a bunch of men ambushing them. Instead, it was a life or death situation that was unsuitable for people to leisurely watch from the sidelines. Young Masters Elite with Southern Lone Blades lot was getting shell-shocked out there. Mountain Breaker Axe was engaged in a fight with Eternal Dominion, so Gufei immediately circled around to the back of that large boulder. All he could do was let out a dispirited moan after he completed the round. That boulder was shaped such that it would be impossible for him to climb his way up. Yizia and the others must have gotten up there using tools, such as the grappling hook, and since his blink was still on cooldown, and there were people occupying the spot up there, he was unable to make his way up there. Meanwhile, in that time it took for him to finish the lap, he looked at the fight below the boulder and saw that Eternal Dominion was the one on the back foot. Mountain Breaker X and Gufei only exchanged 2 rounds, with the first being the swallow drop kick from above and the other being a poorly timed leg whip kick. The loopholes with those 2 moves were glaringly huge, yet Gufei still grasped the perfect moment to exploit those loopholes, which allowed him to deal damage Mountain Breaker X twice. It could be seen that Mountain Breaker X had not treated Gufei to be of equal at the start, and the 2 domineering moves he did was his attempt at insta-killing Gufei. After he lost those 2 exchanges, Mountain Breaker X corrected his attitude and understood that, even though this was a game and the opponent was just another player, he was indeed the real deal, so he stopped fooling around and got serious with this fight. Mountain Breaker X's technique was fierce, and every move he made was grounded on simplicity and practicality. What made it all the more impressive was the courageous aggressiveness he demonstrated, and this was something Gufei and the other martial practitioners were unprepared for. This sort of mentality was honed after going through numerous life and death battles, and the many years of retirement from the army had not dulled his battle instincts. It had just been lying dormant this whole time, buried deep in the recesses of his subconscious, and did not surface when he had been comparing notes with Gufei earlier. However, upon realizing that he needed to get serious with these strong adversaries, that long slumbering verve slowly awakened amid his fight with Eternal Dominion. At the moment, Mountain Breaker X was like a man reborn after Gufei had made his lap around the boulder. Verve was not something that could increase the damage of a single attack in any sense, but it could affect the mentality, judgment and such psychological processes of the enemy and the person in question. The side that had the upper hand in this zealous assault would act free from hesitation, with smooth execution, and each strike would be filled with confidence. On the other hand, the side that lacked this particular fire found themselves becoming more and more indecisive as this continued, filled with hesitation in their attacks, which ended up spoiling any potential opportunity for victory. Eternal Dominion was in a state where he was being suppressed by a Mountain Breaker X's verve. When Gufei left, they were on par with each other, but after he circled around the boulder, Eternal Dominion was already 70% on the defensive and 30% on the offensive. This demonstrated his line of thought of sticking to defense in hopes of finding a chance to counterattack, but in reality, if he had the confidence to defeat his opponent from the get-go, would he need to defend himself like this? Would it not all be over if he just went ahead and mounted an attack by showering the opponent with his punches and kicks? If the person in question was young Master Han or someone else, Gufei might suspect that there could be some despicable scheme at work, but Eternal Dominion was an honest man, and Gufei reckoned that he had really gauged the enemy and realized that he could not defeat the opponent this time, which was why he had decided to stick to defending and counter-attacking. Meanwhile, when Mountain Breaker X noticed Eternal Dominion's attitude, he became all the more zealous in his assault, and that further inflated his self-confidence. With alternating kicks, Mountain Breaker X decisively threw 3 high-angled leg whip kicks, forcing Eternal Dominion to use his arms to guard the coming attacks, blocking with his arms till his fists were almost stuck right up to his face. Mountain Breaker X's right hand went straight for the kill, directly clutching onto Eternal Dominion's throat, as his left hand grabbed a hold of Eternal Dominion's arm, using the in-game skill Seismic Toss this time to throw Eternal Dominion's body upward. But while in midair, Mountain Breaker X actually proceeded to twist Eternal Dominion's arm and immediately pressed him back down to the ground. Gufei let loose a series of sighs as he watched. These men were far more adept when it came to the utilization of grappling methods on their enemies. If this were a martial sparring session, Mountain Breaker X would already emerge victorious from this fight, but since this was an in-game park fight, the match would not be considered over until white light was seen. Evidently, Mountain Breaker X was not here to punch around and train his fitness either, hence, he was truly attempting to choke Eternal Dominion to death. Gufei swiftly ran over, only to hear rushing wind behind him. Broken Water Arrow and that other archer had long been keeping an eye on Gufei from above, so they both released a shot of their own when they saw him make his move. Gufei smiled as he stepped to the side to let the two projectiles pass and went hurtling straight at Mountain Breaker Axe. Shameless! Broken Water Arrow and the other man yelled this in unison. The two, who had been watching Gufei closely, had hurriedly came forth to stop the man with their bolt and arrow respectively, but how would either of them had guessed that Gufei was in fact luring them to take a shot in his direction, using their firepower to siege Wei in order to save Zhouan. Gufei was fast, but he was not faster than a projectile in flight. No matter how powerful Gufei's attack was, his damage was nothing compared to the two shots from those two men. In their anger, the two men opened fire at Gufei, and they watched as he ducked and weaved around all these shots, with not one nicking him in the least. The two even synchronized their attacks by creating a crossfire, yet Gufei still managed to evade everything sent his way with a cheeky smile. The archer could not stand it any longer. He was a famed sharpshooter when he was still in the army, a record holder known for his superb marksmanship. In game, his IGN was Sniper God, and the target now was merely 20 meters away. Yet he just could not seem to hit the man no matter how hard he tried. This made him feel utterly aggrieved. This was the point when he exploded. Harshly tossing the short crossbow he was holding to the ground, he let loose a bellyful of curses. What fucking bullshit game is this? What kind of chicken shit crossbows do they have? Even I am able to make a stronger one than this. Yi Xiaoyu was looking utterly embarrassed as he stood at the side. Below, Gufei, who saw this happening, gave a sigh of relief. He had been faking that look of gleeful ease this whole time. The two men's synchronized crossfire was flawless, and Gufei only barely managed to survive that unscathed after he devoted the utmost concentration to it. Gufei had actually been struck once by their fire, except that he had pirouetted as casually as he could, pulling off that offending projectile before the two men could see it, making them think that not one shot of theirs connected with their target. Convincing Broken Water Arrow of this was not particularly difficult, given how he had already formed a deep impression of Gufei's skill long ago. Besides, that man was not so cocksure of his marksmanship to such a degree. Then, there was Big Brother Sniper God beside him, who finally could no longer bear with the situation. He did not think that Gufei was particularly powerful, rather, he just found the archery equipment in game to simply be too trashy. Had he been given a gun, he felt that he would have long since killed Gufei many times over by now. Back to Mountain Breaker Axe, after he had been forced off his assault by friendly fire, Eternal Dominion, who was being forced to eat dirt, did not simply remain down like a dead fish. Having been given this chance to take a breather, the man immediately did a kip up and coolly turned around. He sought to get back in the fight despite the situation remaining the same. Gufei denounced the man for not learning from his setback as he dashed forward to help relieve him, even as he pointed to the three men up on the boulder. Go get rid of them. Where did you go and what did you do just now? Eternal Dominion was still blabbering on here. Gufei glared at Eternal Dominion darkly. I went and took a piss behind the boulder. Eternal Dominion was left utterly incapable of finding a proper reply to that. The fight between Mountain Breaker Axe and Eternal Dominion had caused the former to be full of himself. He was not particularly bothered by Gufei coming over to take over, merely chuckling. You martial practitioners have plenty of techniques and styles that allows for multiple modifications and changes, but they are also overly complex, far too focused on technical execution. Conversely, the fighting and grappling style we were taught in the army were fine-tuned for real combat, simple, direct, and more importantly, actually effective. We can't compare to you guys in terms of the spectacle of the art, but we are totally not your match when it comes to combat. So what should we do? Surrender and beg for mercy? Gufei laughed. Mountain Breaker Axe laughed, too. Looks like you're still unconvinced. Those two moves that you managed to get the upper hand on me were solely because I've underestimated you. However, I won't be doing that any longer. Even though you might be a mage in this game, I believe you should be the more skilled martial artist between the two of you. Of course. His current standards are only at my caliber 10 years ago, Gufei stated. Fuck. Over at the side, trying to come up with a way to climb up the boulder, Eternal Dominion did not forget to show the man his middle finger. Come at me. Gufei took the initiative to strike. He had actually stowed his moonlit nightfalls away and was now throwing his fist right at Mountain Breaker Axe. Are you not using your weapon? How confident. Speaking of which, I still have no idea how to use that thing. Lugging a sword around is too cumbersome. It should be made obsolete, Mountain Breaker Axe commented. No matter how fresh that is, it has long been obsolete, Gufei said. Mountain Breaker Axe had been considering this issue from a standpoint of warfare, but if they were to consider its application through this perspective, swords were not something that had been adopted into the battlefield on a wider scale. By the time there were more swords out there, they were nothing more than status symbols for those who owned them. They had never once been the main weapon in war. Mountain Breaker Axe moved his hand to block Gufei's punch, but the latter had already retracted his hand, causing Mountain Breaker Axe to block nothing but air. Mountain Breaker Axe merely shook his head at this, for martial practitioners like Gufei and Eternal Dominion simply had too many feints and tricks that he disregarded entirely. Ultimately, in the moment Gufei's hand returned to him, Mountain Breaker Axe saw him position his left leg behind his right, lifting his right leg up to execute a swift side kick. Shocked, Mountain Breaker Axe quickly withdrew his stomach and retreated, but that only led Gufei's right leg to reground itself halfway through, reaching out his right hand with a jab that brushed past Mountain Breaker Axe's eye, delivering the left punch he had been secretly holding back as an uppercut, which landed squarely on Mountain Breaker Axe's jaw. Gufei did not have much strength, so that punch barely did any damage. He immediately retreated after that blow connected, but Mountain Breaker Axe remained rooted to the spot, dumbfounded. Gufei chuckled. Did you find that to be very familiar? That Mountain Breaker Axe at least had a modicum of knowledge when it came to fighting, and even though that backstab attack Gufei had just done had been drastically modified, this ex-soldier was still able to discern it at a glance. That's the sidekick uppercut combo your fighting style often use, right? Gufei asked. That's right. Mountain Breaker Axe nodded. I wonder if you've ever thought of this particular problem? What problem? Aircraft bombings, artillery fire. All these weapons were created after people researched them. Then what about your fighting techniques? Where did that come from? The old-fashioned 20-stab King Die Fist one, turning into the more widely used 16-stab King Die Fist. What did you think caused such a change? Gufei asked. Mountain Breaker Axe was stunned. Buddy, that's all done by us. You can think of us as scientists and researchers when it comes to fighting techniques. Otherwise, did you really think all those combat styles were gifts from the heavens? Gufei asked. Oh, and there's one more thing, Gufei continued. You're mistaken. What? The straightforwardness of the fighting style you've grasped, lacking any overly complicated adaptations, isn't because the simple and straightforward manner makes it more effective for actual combat. Rather, it's because it's much easier to grasp if it is kept that way, simply because you guys don't have the time. With 2 years of conscription and 3 years of voluntary service, it adds up to a total of only 5 years of practice. Using all the time to train in Kung Fu just isn't enough, much less when there are still other skills all of you must master, Gufei explained. Did you really think that guy there isn't your match? Gufei pointed over to Eternal Dominion when he asked this. Speaking from a purely combat standpoint, he's actually better than you. He simply lacks the experience you have. After all, even though we are martial arts practitioners, we don't even have the experience of heavily injuring anyone. Our goal is essentially the pursuit of making a breakthrough in our fighting skills, and this shortcoming of ours has quite the impact on us. You say our Kung Fu lacks combat experience? That's incorrect, but you're correct if we lack actual combat experience. Of course, what I mean by actual combat experience, is the kill on sight kind of experience. Mountain Breaker Axe was astonished. Do you mean to say you've got such experience? Gufei was even more astonished. Don't casually joke about this. Killing someone is essentially exchanging a life for a life. Mountain Breaker Axe chuckled. In other words, you two lack actual combat experience. Gufei smiled at this. That might be true, but the two of us are in entirely different realms, so the difference in experience can be neglected. Were it not for me lacking strength, I would be able to make you eat dirt there and then. Mountain Breaker Axe spoke. Since you're aware that your lack of strength is a huge detriment, just how are you going to win against me? This is a game at the end of the day, So beating me doesn't mean that you're able to really injure me. That's the reason why I've spent so much time talking to you, Gu Fei replied. What? I kept a few grapes in my mouth when I went around the boulder moments ago, and I ate them while talking to you. Right now, they've all finally been digested by me, he said. I'm actually a mage, so I don't need strength, just mana. Fuck. Mountain Breaker Axe realized that he had been tricked. Up on the boulder, Broken Water Arrow and Sniper God were all the more vomiting blood when the two men heard this. It turned out that Gu Fei had called Eternal Dominion over not to kill them but to draw their attention away, making it such that they would be unable to interrupt Gu Fei's consumption of his grapes. Fire resistance, is that it? You're doomed. Gu Fei raised his left hand as a ball of lightning slowly condensed in his palm. Footnotes: CH 622 Footnote 1. A weapon the folk hero, demigod or Ling Xin wields, he uses a lot. CH 622 Footnote 2. One of the 36 stratagems. It was essentially a scheme that focuses on the weakness of the opponent when knowing the superiority they possess in a particular situation. Source: https://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/36_stratagems #besiege_w%c3%a8-rescue_zh%c3%hey0 622 Footnote 3. A style of martial arts that's taught to the armed police force in the 80s, that had been adapted to the 16 steps by the late 90s. Originally adapted from the martial arts style Mage Fist. Chapter 623, Cask Effect. Mountain Breaker Axe was surprised. Even though he was no expert when it came to MMOs, he at least had a good idea of the most basic spell attributes, the calculation of damage, and other such matters. Gu Fei was not wrong that, for a fighter to withstand two of his twin incineration, he of course needed fire-resistant gear, but Gu Fei had changed to using lightning spells, so fire resistance would be completely useless. With a flip of his right hand, Moonlit Nightfalls was back in his hand once more. Even though Palm of Thunder required Gu Fei to have an empty hand to be unleashed, he still needed to have an equipment to raise the damage of his spell. Gu Fei made a feint with his sword, and Mountain Breaker Axe, who had indeed not studied anything related to blades like what he had claimed, was completely unable to see through the feint, and very conscientiously focused on dodging the attack. With a smile, Gu Fei's sword was already retracted back. Taking a step backward as he straightened his body, he pushed out that Palm of Thunder, which had been collecting power in his left hand this whole time. Mountain Breaker Axe, whose attention was on this one move, immediately sucked in his abdomen and bent over. Both his arms shot out toward the mage, one grasping Gu Fei's wrist as the other went straight for his shoulder. Be careful! Yi Xiao hurriedly yelled out this warning, but it was already too late. Gu Fei flashed a smile at Mountain Breaker Axe. I'm a mage. Saying this, his Palm of Thunder shot out from his palm, right into his abdomen. A powerful electrical current arced through Mountain Breaker Axe's entire body, and the electric sparks created lit him up like a lantern. Mountain Breaker Axe watched as his HP dropped fast, and only one thought came to his mind. Fuck, I got assassinated again. If this was a normal fight, Mountain Breaker Axe would cleanly dodge that palm strike from Gu Fei, but unfortunately for him, this was a game. Gu Fei's Palm of Thunder did not necessarily need to make direct contact with his target for the attack to go through, and the condensation of lightning was nothing more than part of the spell formation process. A normal mage would 100% use it as a ranged spell. Who would be like Gu Fei and actually engage in close combat with the spell ready to be unleashed. In the end, that moment when Mountain Breaker Axe dodged that palm was when Gu Fei released the spell, and it was as if the latter's arm had suddenly extended, so how could the former dodge the attack? All he could do was eat the entirety of the damage. Yi Xiao had already discerned what Gu Fei wanted to do, but it was a pity that he was too late to warn Mountain Breaker Axe. While he knew what skills Gu Fei possessed, how was he supposed to know how Gu Fei would use them? Take for example how Gu Fei had just used his blink to materialize in midair and cut Mountain Breaker Axe before. He would have informed Mountain Breaker Axe of this beforehand if he had guessed that Gu Fei would make that sort of play. Sorry, I actually don't have the time. Gu Fei extended a word of apology, mercilessly creating swift sword trails and finally killing off Mountain Breaker Axe. Gu Fei did not forget that this was not a martial arts duel between the two practitioners, but two parties engaged in a park battle. Instead, he could continue to trade blows with Mountain Breaker Axe and have his fun, but Young Masters Elite and Southern Lone Blades team were still in a precarious situation. The damage from the raining projectiles were uneven, and most were hardly a threat to those experts, but these ambushers soon realized this problem and quickly changed from targeting Young Masters Elite and Southern Lone Blades team as a whole to concentrating their firepower on one target. The moment more than a dozen of these men began target firing, the resultant damage could no longer be overlooked. Fuck, they're targeting me again. Royal Godcall observed the enemy's position and anxiously ducked into the safety of the pack. Southern Lone Blade heard his cry and quickly strode over to help defend in his direction. Using his sword and shield, Southern Lone Blade managed to bear the concentrated firepower that came at him. In the end, he heard Glue bellow, "No, no, no. They're all targeting me over here." Southern Lone Blade promptly turned around and headed over to the man. "It's me." Royal Godcall yelled. "Go over to Glue." Young Master Han shouted. "The priests will focus on Royal." "Ah, I'm gonna die." Royal Godcall watched innumerable arrows fly right at him. No matter what job class these attackers possessed, their marksmanship with the bow was amazingly precise, so even though they did not have the projectile speed of an archer, it still was not easy to duck or avoid the incoming fire. Royal Godcall knew that he would still be fine if he simply had to deal with one or two arrows, but with so many arrows hurtling right at him, he was completely at a loss on where to hide or how he should dodge them. That was when a series of thuds resounded. Right there and then, Royal Godcall got hit with 6 arrows, and with how fast the enemy's follow-up attacks were, the second volley of arrows was already flying right after. Royal Godcall had absolutely no confidence in his weak and frail archer body as he ate 6 more arrows. A total of 12 arrows perforated Royal Godcall's body. He was now shutting his eyes tightly, firmly believing that he was already dead, when warm sensation enveloped him as a priest's heel landed on him. Royal Godcall opened his eyes and discovered that he was still alive, opening his mouth to praise himself. "Surviving 12 arrows, I'm just too indomitable." Everyone rolled their eyes at him as Young Master Han reprimanded. "Take a look at the enemy's job classes." The opposing force jointly attacked fast and dispersed just as quickly. They had split themselves into 2 groups this time around, with the first bunch attacking Glue while the other focusing on Royal Godcall. The ones concentrating their fire on Glue were all archers, while the players attacking Royal Godcall were a patchwork collection of job classes. Royal Godcall would of course have no problem surviving with the aid of priests supporting him. Instead, it was Glue who might have very well died had it not been for Southern Lone Blade's timely protection. Brother Assist had finished collating all the enemy's data at this time and was currently giving everyone an overview. 3 archers, 2 knights, 2 warriors, 2 mages, 3 thieves, and 2 fighters. There are 14 players, and they have a very balanced spread of job classes. Oh, Miles and Eternal Dominion are still taking on 2 archers, a fighter and a priest on their end. Ah, that fighter just got killed by Miles. Brother Assist happened to be looking over at Gu Fei the very moment his palm of thunder landed on his target and witnessed the series of sword cuts he had executed to finish off Mountain Breaker Axe. When that was done, he saw Gu Fei turn to run toward them, and Brother Assist got excited. "Miles is coming to assist us." Young Master Han's expression did not change in the slightest. Wrinkling his brows, he scoffed, "What's the point of him coming here? Let's carve a path out for ourselves to withdraw first." Both sides had nearly the same number of players, yet these experts were the ones who were being suppressed. No one was willing to admit it, but the fact remained, they were currently severely handicapped in this skirmish, and it was not because they did not wish to mount a counterattack, but that there was no suitable opportunity for them to do so. "We can't escape," Young Master Han solemnly informed. "Have none of you guys realized it yet?" No matter what job classes these people have, all of them had added points to agility. You're right. Their squad coordination is far too well synchronized. Well versed in teamwork, even Southern Lone Blade had to sigh in admiration. "They are professionals," Young Master Han concluded. "So what do we do?" The members of Young Master's elite realized the severity of the situation, for even young Master Han's speech had a rare pessimistic tone to it. These people possess superb combat capabilities, but they seem to be noobs when it comes to gaming, and that's the only advantage we have over them, young Master Han said. How do you know? Everyone asked. They don't know how to use their job class specialties, and they're all playing with bows and arrows. Isn't that obvious? The ever-present scorn and sarcasm were still there even when young Master Han was being pessimistic. So what do we do? These men all might seem to be idly chatting, but they had in fact fended off 2 more waves of attacks in the time they took to have this conversation. Everybody had been on the move, yet they simply were unable to make a breakthrough from their enemy's encirclement. It was just like what young Master Han had said, the enemy had all allocated points to agility, so the squad's mobility was well beyond what their group could muster. Young Master Han's group had the baby-legged priests and warriors among their numbers, so their movement as a whole was capped to match these slower job classes. This was precisely the definition of the cask effect 1. It did not matter how tall a water cask was, since the height at which it could retain water ultimately depended on the shortest stave used in its construction. If we can no longer withstand this, our only choice is to sacrifice the knights to save the king. Young Master Han first informed them of a probable solution for the worst case scenario. Fuck, who's going to be the knight in this? War Without Wounds was depressed. Young Master Han stared fixedly at him. I'll be a knight, too. The others, who were all sad that they were being treated as the short staves, all froze. Sure enough, although young Master Han always acted pompous as if he were the boss, he indeed was a short stave here in this scenario as well. He was a golden ratio priest who added his stats solely to spirit and intelligence and left none to agility. He was a baby leg, too. What if everyone swaps out for some agility equipment? Brother Assist suggested. The experts Royal God Call, Glue, Black Water, and the Ilk, were sure to have equipment that added to their agility. What Brother Assist meant was for them to first exchange a few of their agility boosting equipment to the baby legs so that their movement speed would increase. It won't be effective, and it's hardly worth the effort. Young Master Han shook his head and regarded the crowd. Actually, most of us are baby legs. Everyone looked at one another and realized that he was right. There were actually only 2 job classes that focused on agility in this game, and they were either archers or thieves. Thus, it was actually more common to be baby-legged. Players who concentrated their stat points to agility was not even a third of the total possible job class choices, yet it was precisely because of this that everyone had more or less the same mobility during group PvP. No one had ever seen or experienced a situation where someone would be utterly suppressed in their mobility like this. Everyone, calm down and consider the pros and cons of both sides, young Master Han said. Their allocation of points to agility does mean that they have the advantage in mobility over us, but in terms of firepower, there's a limit to the damage or support output they can produce. Brother Assist, can you calculate their current damage output? Because the enemies were using bows to engage in a ranged assault, the appraisal skill was unusable, so Brother Assist could only ask about the damage everyone sustained after getting struck by an arrow to form an estimation of the enemy's firepower. While the others were fighting, Brother Assist was busy sorting through all the calculations in his notebook. I'm almost done, Brother Assist said. Miles can perhaps help us make a breakthrough, young Master Han said. Everyone saw what had happened to Blackwater. I'm afraid that these guys are far more formidable in melee, so there's something I don't understand. Why are they so patiently moving along with us like this? If they're to make a push, there's a good chance of us already getting subdued. That might not necessarily be true. War Without Wounds brandished that large claymore before him. Getting shot at but being unable to return the favor, the man was already choking on a belly full of anger pent up inside him. Eternal Dominion has just been defeated by the fighter on their side. Young Master Han lightly made this comment, and no one else had any words to rebut this. How terrifying was it to face off against Eternal Dominion? Southern Lone Blade and the others were well aware of this fact as his team had nearly been wiped out by his efforts alone. While they were discussing their battle strategy, Goofy was already rushing in to provide assistance. However, It was apparent that the enemies had no wish for him to join with the others as they directed part of their firepower over to intercept him. Ordinary players could not imagine the level of crossfire coordination these ambushers could demonstrate. It could be said that just this handful of men had already achieved the performance of traversing 400-man archer formation. They were completely capable of sealing any chance of their target dodging the attack. Anybody could dodge an arrow to the chest by evading to either side or crouching low, but by preemptively firing arrows at the spots the targets could shunt to, dodging in any of the directions meant stepping into a projectile's trajectory by their volition. This would have been a huge problem for a normal person, but since the person in question was Gufei and these ordinary arrows were not from archers, their stats and skills were essentially worthless, so no matter how great their marksmanship was, the speed of their arrows was just that. In fact, the accuracy of their shots actually made it more convenient for him to strike the arrows down. He was more afraid of them witlessly succeeding in scoring a hit by no means of skill through a messy glut of arrow fire. Gufei world moonlit night falls into a purple blur. Because these men were very accurate with their shots, Gufei could discern the trajectory of every arrow coming his way, allowing him to easily swat them away, falling off like wilted flower petals. Gufei would evade the shots he could and bat away those he could not, taking those shots squarely on himself when he could do neither. As long as he could see who was firing the shots, Gufei could simply ignore all those arrows fired by mages and other classes as they would not give him much damage. Damn! That was the only word that came to the minds of young Master Han and the others as they witnessed such a monster advanced so boldly and untrammeled. Since the shots from the other job classes won't be a threat to 1,000 miles drunk, leave him to the archers. Broken Water Arrow gave this order to the men even as he leapt off the large boulder. Eternal Dominion had been studying the boulder all this while, but he simply could not find any way up there as he faced the concerted ranged attacks from Broken Water Arrow and Sniper God. However, that was just Gufei's attempt at diverting the two men's attention before, having succeeded in his goal of eliminating Mountain Breaker Axe, Gufei gestured for the man to leave as well. Eternal Dominion obviously did not have as high a movement speed as Gufei, so he trailed after him by several steps. Thus, when he heard people falling to the ground behind him, which was Broken Water Arrow and the others landing once they had leapt off the large boulder, he immediately turned to engage them without a word. The man had overheard Gufei and Mountain Breaker Axe's chat, and he received a bit of an epiphany. What Gufei had said was true. Just from the Kung Fu Eternal Dominion had trained in, there was no doubt that he would be better than Mountain Breaker Axe in combat. He had lost to that uncle purely because he did not have enough combat experience under his belt. Honestly speaking, this MMO was a great opportunity for someone like him to accumulate this combat experience. Take that crotch swipe Gufei did with his sword before. Were this in the real world, it was doubtful anyone would ever have the chance their entire life to use that attack. But here in the game, that move was not in the least bit taboo as it was not going to deal real damage at the end of the day. Eternal Dominion was not as mentally flexible as Gufei. In fact, he, as a combat instructor, had only gotten into this game to aid his students in beating the tough adversaries they had chanced upon. Coupled with a gaming account being expensive for a thrifty person like him, Eternal Dominion had only decided to continue playing this game with his students as he was unwilling to waste the money he spent getting it in the first place. His original intent of playing greatly differed from Gufei, so he did not really consider the issues that the latter had become aware of and pondered over. Hearing Gufei say all that, a sudden epiphany came to him. That's right. I can go wild with Kung Fu here in this game. There's no need for me to restrain myself. Unlike in reality. When the now enlightened Eternal Dominion heard the sound behind him, he acted just like Gufei when he first entered the game. He was looking forward to a fight with great enthusiasm. Leaping off a boulder several meters high was nothing in this game, but they would still have a bit of balance in order to land firmly on the ground. Broken Water Arrow and Sniper God of course had no problem with this and dexterously rolled when their feet hit the ground to absorb the momentum of their fall. But how would a civilian like Yixiao be able to do this? The man planted both his feet upon landing, thinking that he would be able to stabilize himself better doing so, but he simply ended up losing his footing when the force of his fall shook him so much that he toppled forward. This was nothing much by itself. Most players would also look foolish when asked to jump from a height of several meters, but the problem was that Eternal Dominion was currently making a beeline for them, and falling down like that resulted in him homing on the priest. Eternal Dominion was anxious to get himself a human sandbag, so why would he be courteous now? Seeing Yi Xiao reach out his right hand when he lost his balance, unknown just what he was trying to get hold of, Eternal Dominion quickly came forward with his left hand thrusting out and struck down, targeting the right arm past the elbow. Ugh! Yi Xiao's piercing scream sounded like the dying squeal of a slaughtered pig. The entire Beishi forest was stunned as it reverberated, and the players who were engaged with fighting monsters or parking involuntarily stopped what they were doing. Eternal Dominion was all the more frightened by this, hurriedly darting back away from Yi Xiao as he warily kept his eyes trained on him. The sensation of pain in game was not simply weakened. There was even an upper limit designed in place so no further pain could be felt once this threshold for simulated pain was crossed in parallel world. At this moment, Yi Xiao had indeed reached this pain threshold, and it was excruciatingly unbearable. This was his first time being repulsed by the realistic simulation he was so smug about creating. This pain is just too real. Is my right arm broken? He looked down at his arm once this thought crossed his mind. All he saw was a forearm, which humans could normally not bend, appearing to be in two parts. The part of the forearm attached to his elbow was still there, but the other half of it was already bent inwardly like a chicken wing. His arm was really broken. Ugh! Yi Xiao screamed again, this time, due to the fear he was feeling. That forearm of his was currently drenched in fresh blood. Even the chicken wings people would see in the supermarket, be they frozen or fresh, would have their blood washed clean. Fuck. His arm is now a 3-section staff. War without wounds, and the others could see this as well. That's too damn vicious, Royal God Call muttered. Gu Fei could see it clearly where he was standing as well and similarly sucked in a sharp cool breath. Eternal Dominion's Gu family was the most adept with the Dragon Fist style, and there was a particular branch of the Fire Dragon Fist that the Gu family would not impart, let alone learning it. He had not even seen it executed before. This was because that particular fist style was extremely destructive, focusing on offense as defense. Every move in the style required its user to exert their full force, so every attack would either seal a person's acupuncture point or shatter bones. To put it into more popular terms, anyone struck by those moves would either find themselves internally injured, if they were not already externally injured, without any exception. This sort of fist style definitely could not be used during friendly spars, unless the intention was to kill the opponent. But because the Gu family followed the trend in the Kung Fu community, this branch of fist style was only imparted within the family and would never be used during sparring sessions. If every move would result in heavy injuries, there was simply no point to use it. The usage of fist style would lose its underlying intent if the practitioner was actively avoiding actually injuring the opponent. To think that this rascal has actually used the Fire Dragon Fist. Gu Fei was exuberant. This was something he would never have the chance to see in the real world. After weighing the pros and cons in his heart for a bit, Gu Fei promptly stopped his advance and turned to watch Eternal Dominion's fight. Instead, I'll be sure to avenge you guys if any of you die. Gu Fei did not forget to mention this to the comrades he had abandoned. Fuck. All of them raised their middle fingers at him. Footnotes. CH 623 Footnote 1. A more English saying with the same meaning is a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Chapter 624, Ambush. A clash of daggers. Broken Water Arrow and Sniper God rushed to protect Yi Xiao even as they pelted Eternal Dominion with arrows. The two really appeared to be veteran soldiers who had experienced countless battles, for they were not in the least bit daunted by the scene before them. Sniper God looked at Yi Xiao's broken forearm, which had been bent like a chicken wing, and exclaimed, "Ah, even your bone is showing, how is it so realistic?" Yi Xiao was no longer howling by now. There was a limit to the pain he was feeling, and it was completely tolerable at this point. He only screamed at first due to the suddenness of the pain. People would often shriek when they were involuntarily pricked with a needle, would they not? When he howled for the second time, it was a result of the terror he was feeling. Anyone who saw their arm suddenly be in such a state would naturally have quite the scare. When he heard Sniper God's exclamation, he could not help but lower his head to take a closer look. Peering down and seeing the white of his bone protruding from his flesh, coupled with the grisly sight of his flesh hanging with bits of skin and bone fragments dotting around a mess of mosaic, Yi Xiao felt a wave of nausea overcome him. A system prompt soon rang in his head. An increase in the user's abdominal pressure as a result of stomach discomfort was detected. If you are unable to recover to a stable state, you will be forcefully disconnected from the game. The VR gaming equipment players of Parallel World used could detect some of the real-world conditions the player's physical body might be under, and this was the same system warning Traversing 4C's guild leader had received back then when his heart rate severely spiked up. Yi Xiao was experiencing something similar right now, except his issue was not with his heart but stomach. Instead, Yi Xiao was of course no stranger to this setup, so he quickly turned away from the gruesome sight and pulled out a bottle of water from his pocket. He then took 2 full gulps of water to suppress the nausea he was feeling. Sniper God gazed astonishingly at his action. What, did the game you designed give you a fright? Yi Xiao was at a total loss for words. What do we do about this? Broken Water Arrow asked. Even cure is unable to completely heal up this sort of heavy injury. I'll need to return to the city and locate the dedicated healer NPC to get it treated, Yi Xiao answered. Cure was a level 40 skill Light Priest learned, and it was a potent remedy for effects that caused continuous loss of HP or attacks that lowered the maximum HP of players, but with his arm broken to such a vicious manner, even cure could not heal him up. Seeing how my HP is steeply dropping, there's no point in making my way back. I'll be perfectly fine once I respawn, so there's no rush, Yi Xiao said. Will bandaging the wound stop the blood loss? Broken Water Arrow asked again. If the triage is done properly, it will indeed be effective. Yi Xiao nodded. Quickly get Xiaoshan over, Sniper God ordered. Hang in there. Broken Water Arrow said to Yi Xiao as he fired off a message. This hang in there Broken Water Arrow had uttered was not merely a show of solidarity for Yi Xiao, but a prompt for him to keep himself alive. The priest designated his left hand as his dominant hand and waved his magic staff to keep himself topped up with HP even as he asked Sniper God. Who's Xiaoshan? He's a medic from our squad back in the day. All our first aid skills are rudimentary at best, so it's better to get him over here. Sniper God laughed even as he kept peppering arrows at Eternal Dominion. Eternal Dominion, who was being suppressed by the enfilade of arrows from Broken Water Arrow and Sniper God combined, was temporarily unable to close in. Gufei had reached him at this point and very excitedly asked, was that Fire Dragon Fist? Yup. Eternal Dominion nodded. I've heard so much about it. Gufei commented. It seems a little brutal. Yi Xiao's priest robe was already dyed in his own blood, even as a puddle of blood pooled beneath him. Eternal Dominion found the sight to be somewhat unbearable. Have you never seen blood before? Even though martial artists would not deal a brutal hand to their opponents during such technical sparrings, the very nature of the activity would place the two exponents in danger of death. Any accident that happened in the process would lead to rather disastrous results. Even Gufei had experienced his fair share of stitches and fractured bones as well. I've seen nosebleeds, Eternal Dominion answered. Gufei was left a little speechless after hearing that. Even children fighting would often result in nosebleeds. See, it's clearly the game over-exaggerating. Anyone would have already died if they lost so much blood. Gufei consoled Eternal Dominion. Yi Xiao spat out another mouthful of blood when he heard this. Unexpectedly, even Sniper God agreed with Gufei's assessment. It is a little outrageous. Haven't you guys ever considered such a problem when making this game? There's a limit to the amount of blood any human has, so even if the blood isn't staunched, there's no way you should be bleeding endlessly like this. Sniper God glanced at Yi Xiao's broken arm, and the blood was still gushing out. Gufei nodded. That's right. Blood takes up about 7 to 8% of our body mass. Look at how skinny he is. I reckon he weighs a little over 100 pounds, yet the amount of blood he's lost so far looks to be about 10 pounds. Sniper God shook his head. That's too much. I think it's only 8 pounds or so. 8 pounds is already too much. Let's say he's about 120 pounds in weight. So if we take 8% of his body mass as the total blood a human has in their body, that will come at about 9.6 pounds, so even if we round it up to 10 pounds, won't losing 8 pounds of blood be a bit too much still? Gufei wondered aloud. It is indeed too much. Losing just 3 pounds out of the 10 pounds of blood is enough to kill him already, Sniper God concurred. Look, he's lost 8 pounds of blood so far. It's fake. Everything is fake here. Gufei reasoned to Eternal Dominion. To think you'd even know such things. Eternal Dominion was utterly impressed. It's just the basics. Gufei tried to play it off casually. Yi Xiao was still steadily losing his blood while the three men were discussing this topic. Broken Water Arrow, who was standing at the side, rolled his eyes while he listened to this conversation. Still, even as they talked, Sniper God never stopped firing his arrows at Gufei and Eternal Dominion with great acuity. The two dodged and evaded these shots as they chatted with one another, mainly focusing on the wavering thoughts Eternal Dominion had after that lethal strike he had just executed. Gufei was attempting to open his eyes, and the two were not rushing ahead at all. By the time Gufei was done giving his enlightening speech, Eternal Dominion was invigorated once more now that Gufei successfully convinced him that the heavy injury Yi Xiao had sustained was fake to the point of blatant exaggeration. Go on. Show me your Fire Dragon Fist, Gufei encouraged. With Gufei and Eternal Dominion advancing together, Broken Water Arrow and Sniper God found it more difficult to see either of their movements. However, being archers and having plenty of experience in actual combat, both of them knew that they could still retreat even if they could not fend them off. Hence, in such a fashion, the two men withdrew as they attacked. Their attack slowly formed into the kiting fighting style often seen in MMOs. In the end, Broken Water Arrow was crying out after they retreated no more than several steps. Fuck, bring the injured along as you move. Damn. Sniper God saw that Yi Xiao was still foolishly planted in one spot, so he quickly dashed over and dragged him. Bro, you gotta follow the group. Stop, stop, stop. You're breaking it. Yi Xiao hurriedly yelped. Who was it that said that there was no use for blood to continue spurting out like this? His HP had been consistently declining this whole time. He was only surviving up to now because he had been tossing heal after heal on himself. Sniper God dragging him interrupted his cast of heal twice, and his HP was steadily decreasing. It's already broken. Sniper God thought that he was referring to his arm. My spells, I mean you're breaking my casting. Yi Xiao yelled in panic. Sniper God was not a day one newbie, so he more or less understood how this game worked. Realizing what Yi Xiao was saying with a brief pause, he quickly shouted to Broken Water Arrow. We need to provide cover. Wait for the injured to make the first move. Broken Water Arrow darted over to receive Gufei. I'll deal with him. Ultimately, Broken Water Arrow had experience exchanging blows with Gufei, so he had a better understanding of the latter's fighting style, which was why he had picked this tough-to-deal opponent. Even though Gufei was seen as an expert in Sniper God's eyes, at least the man did not end up breaking someone else's arm, so Broken Water Arrow's choice of opponent meant that he could deal with the savage brute's Eternal Dominion himself. Sniper God's heart was beating with trepidation when he came up to take on Eternal Dominion. Even though these soldiers were not a job class in the game, and were all proficient in a single style of combat, they each had their strong suits as well. Sniper God was previously the squad's sniper. He was definitely the best out of the rest in terms of his marksmanship. While his skills in close-quarter combat was not particularly awful, Mountain Breaker Axe was still considered to be one of the most skilled close combatants among them, and he had lost quite badly when facing Gufei. It appeared that some of these kung fu scientists were not just blowing hot air. Sniper God knew that he was not as good as Mountain Breaker Axe, so if he were to go up against such an opponent, he could not help but feel quite troubled. However, being troubled was one thing, acting on it was another thing entirely. Being troubled would only mean that Sniper God had to be extra careful when he struck. If the theoretical gap between people could simply decide the outcome of a fight, then there would be no need for there to be confrontation in this world. Sniper God's hand dove into his pocket and pulled out a pristine poniard. It was not a particularly top-tier piece of equipment, but its shape and specifications suited him very well. The way these people allocated their stat points and chose their equipment was extremely similar with how Gufei initially started out as well. These ex-soldiers had all picked the weapons that they were most handy with. Sniper God was not Yi Xiao. After all, so Eternal Dominion would not have such an easy time breaking his arm in one shot. Besides, the Fire Dragon Fist was not something that would break someone's arm without fail, as that would depend on the choices made during combat. At the moment, the two were engaged in a battle, fists and kicks flying all over, and the unarmed Eternal Dominion did not seem to be in the least bit disadvantaged. This park fight here was a contest of actual combat skills, and it was pointless to compare the stats or traits of their equipment or weapons. Sniper God had a short blade in his hand. Everyone would think that meant his damage was stronger, but the damage it could actually do was nothing compared to Eternal Dominion's punches with his gloved fists. That was a point that these two men had already forgotten about by this time. Gufei was only casually dealing with the attack Broken Water Arrow was mounting him as half of his concentration fell on Eternal Dominion. He would exclaim from time to time, reflecting at what he saw during other times while occasionally pondering over things. Broken Water Arrow was rather dispirited by this. He did not think that there was such a huge gap between him and Gufei when they had last fought, yet it seemed that this man was more than capable to absent-mindedly settle his attacks right now. Broken Water Arrow felt that this was a good thing, though. He was not hoping to defeat Gufei in a one-on-one PvP in the first place anyway. All he and Sniper God wanted to do was hold these two men a while, so Yixiao could patch his injury up. If Gufei's only concern was the two men fighting and was not planning to quickly take down Broken Water Arrow, that would actually work well with their goal to buy time. Indeed, Gufei was purely concerned with watching Eternal Dominion's Fire Dragon Fist in action. Be it the dying Yixiao, the opponent before him, or the precarious situation his comrades were in, none mattered in this regard. When those assailants, who had successfully surrounded Young Master's Elite and Southern Lone Blades team, received a message from Broken Water Arrow, 3 archers swiftly withdrew from the skirmish, and later, a priest immediately turned around to make his way over to Yixiao. The firepower from the archers were entirely different from the other job classes, and those 3 men pulling away had alleviated the pressure on the gang of experts quite a bit. In addition, they were even feeling a little despondent over this change. The harder opponents had all been sent to deal with Gufei and Eternal Dominion, and those not so significant ones were left to deal with them, a group of so-called experts. The archers possess long-ranged capabilities, so the 3 men that headed over to where Gufei and Eternal Dominion were soon near enough to attack the two. Almost at once, the 3 archers opened fire, and their inclusion had left the 2 men quite frenetic. Broken Water Arrow and Sniper God similarly intended to extract themselves from this melee to deal with Gufei and Eternal Dominion at range. However, it was not that simple to retreat whenever they wished when going up against opponents like Gufei and Eternal Dominion. Attempting to withdraw meant that they would have to pay the price of taking a move or two from these 2 martial practitioners. Broken Water Arrow was wary of the spell damage Gufei could dish out, while Sniper God had seen how Yixiao lost at least 8 pounds of blood to Eternal Dominion, so the man nationally did not dare to make any rash moves and pay the price, either. Meanwhile, a priest had circled over to Yixiao, and this was the medic Xioshin Broken Water Arrow had called over to help bandage Yixiao. Yixiao could tell what this priest was coming to do, and he was looking forward to his arrival. Currently, he was in an epic struggle with his dropping HP, and he was having trouble lasting much longer. In this game, while there seemed to be no limit to the amount of blood one could lose, there was a limit to how much mana every player had. Yixiao was blankly watching this priest when he saw a black figure appear right behind the man. Panicking, Yixiao cried aloud, "Be careful!" Fights were breaking out all over this battlefield, so who knew who Yixiao was referring to when he shouted this warning? Everybody consciously looked around, and quite a few spotted the black figure that had come hurtling to the back of the priest Xioshin. This incident revealed that, despite Yixiao being a game designer, he barely had any actual combat experience in-game. Why would anyone just shout "be careful" when they discovered something dangerous in such a chaotic battle? Just call out the person's name directly, instead. Xioshin. The others, who had realized what was going on, were more experienced and directly called out his name. Xioshin quickly turned his head, but this was the moment when Sword Demon entered the invisible state of his Shadow Mist Assault, so all he saw was blank space behind him. Xioshin was a medic in the squad, so while he needed to grasp some of the skills that everyone had picked up, there was still a limit to how much energy he could devote to things. At the end of the day, Zeoshin mainly focused his energy on the medical side of things, so how would he have the extravagance to attain too high of a skill when it came to marksmanship or close-quarter combat? While he still possessed passable skills in these various avenues by most standards, he was certainly not on the same level as his fellow comrades, let alone possess the intuition that would allow him to sense killing intent. Now that Sword Demon was invisible to the naked eye, Zeoshin had no idea what was happening, but soon, he saw, not just one, but two figures appearing before his eyes. Even Sword Demon was very surprised by this. He never thought a stealthed thief would be protecting this priest. However, because Sword Demon had been in stealth all this while and was almost instantly upon the enemies when he materialized again, even the thief could not take the necessary precautions against Sword Demon's attack, so he had to make do with a hasty defense. Actually, before these men had engaged in the skirmish with Young Master's Elite and Southern Lone Blades gang, Yi Xiao had emphasized on them the importance of preventing Sword Demon's Shadow Mist assault. Broken Water Arrow had once came up with some very targeted counters for it, so everyone was already informed just how they could thwart that skill. However, the counter he had come up with was useless in this situation, for that was only useful for dodging. At the moment, Sword Demon's target was not the thief himself, so what was the use for this thief to dodge the attack? What he needed to do was block Sword Demon's Shadow Mist assault and defend the clueless Zeoshin from the stab directed at him. This one defense would depend entirely on his reaction and experience. It was not perfect, but at least, the damage from Shadow Mist assault did not get through unmitigated. Nevertheless, the force of impact remained, so the revealed thief and the priest Zeoshin behind him were both sent flying by it. Sword Demon did not hesitate for even a moment, and his target remained unchanged. Activating his fleet foot, the man began bounding straight for Zeoshin. Zeoshin got up and squared up against the enemy. Even though he was just a medic, he was still familiar with the skills that a soldier would learn, be it shooting or close combat, and his standards were much better than Sword Demon in these aspects. Unfortunately for him, his job class was a huge handicap. He was a priest in this game through and through, so while he could shoot an arrow, punch, or even wield a dagger, Sword Demon simply ignored whatever he did. How much damage could a priest, who depended on these methods of attack, deal? Anyway, this was the particular aspect Sword Demon homed in on, so he decided to utilize the most barbaric way of fighting, a cut for a cut. There was no technique or dodging to this fight. They simply stood there and took turns trading blows. Zeoshin wished to evade Sword Demon's attacks, but against an opponent who ignored every cut, slash, or punch he threw and only concentrated on stabbing him, it was truly difficult for him to completely dodge everything. At the very least, Zeoshin was incapable of doing this. Sword Demon's lasting sentence, dying breath, flinched the priest expediently, so despite taking quite a lot of the latter's kicks and punches, the difference between their damage output was entirely incomparable. There was hardly any time for anyone to think of saving him before Sword Demon killed him off. The thief, who had been sent flying off with Zeoshin after being blown away by Shadow Mist assault, only just got up, and he charged right to Sword Demon at once, thrusting his dagger out viciously as he did. Sword Demon did not bother dodging this, either. This man might not be a priest, but he knew that the thief had lost quite a bit of HP from his Shadow Mist assault before, so his HP had surely been reduced. Sword Demon executed a backhand slash in response and began clashing blades with the man again. That initial clash damaged the other player, but this clash now was for his life. Even though this thief had more experience when it came to actual combat, Sword Demon had much more gaming experience. This was a battle, but it was also in a game. Sword Demon's experience in this was entirely applicable, but the enemy had a disadvantage in terms of his experience. The man's dagger came stabbing at Sword Demon's chest, looking to wound him. Thinking that Sword Demon would dodge to avoid the attack, he intended to then throw Sword Demon down to the ground with a turn of his hand in hopes of quickly finishing him off while Sword Demon was laid out on the ground. This stab from the thief went to the heart, so unless Sword Demon was caught off guard, there was no way that the latter would not avoid it. This was the thought he had ingrained from his real combat experience. Once he dodges it, I can complete my follow-up attack. He'll be dead if he doesn't dodge it. In the end, When that dagger of his went plunging to Sword Demon's chest, Sword Demon also took this chance to stab him back in his waist. That was when he realized the problem. Fuck. There's no guarantee I can kill someone in this game by stabbing them in the chest. I still gotta do math. This arithmetic question told him that his HP was already 0. He was as good as dead. The expression on his face showed just how disgruntled he was with this result. It was not that he did not know about it, or that he did not understand the concept, he merely had not gotten used to all this yet. A single sneak attack instantly resulted in the deaths of 2 players. Sword Demon's results were far greater than Gooface. Royal God Call hollered, unruffled by his emotions, "Sword Demon, you're too handsome." Flame Cinched Clothes asked, would the word handsome be too much of an insult? He wouldn't mind, would he? Everyone stared at him, and Flame Cinched Clothes hurriedly shrank his neck. Sword Demon did not seem to be in the least bit delighted. He knew that luck had played a huge part in his ability to kill off those opponents just then, and he might be unable to replicate that result if he were to do it again with another pair of these ex-soldiers. After taking care of the 2, Sword Demon sprinted off. Time was of the essence. Plenty of arrows were already being fired at him. After all, Sword Demon was already aware that the acuity demonstrated by the enemies would not be affected by his movement speed, so he had already prepared a path of retreat for himself after he finished his assault. At the moment, he successfully made a mad dash behind a huge white rock, not even revealing a bit of his foot thereafter. Chapter 625, Hooligan Experts. When the circumstances permitted, a medic would always have another defending them. This was a habit that these men had cultivated over their many years as veteran soldiers, and that had not changed a bit after entering the game. When Seoshin was called over to perform triage, that thief had promptly followed to defend him. What he had not expected that, though, was not only would he fail to protect Seoshin, he would also end up joining him. The whole bunch of them felt frustrated at this result. Although they knew that this was just a game, and were well aware that those 3 were back on their feet, alive and breathing, back at the spawn point by now, the loss of their 3 comrades consecutively incited these veterans' anger. Even during the most difficult mission they had undertaken back in the days when they were active, their squad had never once lost 3 lives at one go like this. They were merely pitted against a bunch of civilians in a Vermo, yet they had just lost 3 of their fellow comrades one after another while in a situation where the situation was entirely in their enemy's control. This was truly a devastating blow to their pride. A torrent of arrows chased after Sword Demon. These ex-soldiers clearly saw their target turning into a pincushion by their arrows, yet the man simply did not die and even managed to coolly slide behind a rock for cover. They could feel great discontentment well up in them. In the meantime, Yixiao no longer had someone coming to his rescue, and it appeared that his mana was about to run out. Once that happened, all that was left was for him to resign to the fact that his HP will steadily drop until he died. Even though he knew plenty of methods to resolve his current quandary, he did not have the means to execute them. Broken Water Arrow and Sniper God were the closest to him. Getting either of them to bandage him up would work, but the severity of Yixiao's injury made the 2 hesitate. Since their medic Seoshin was gone, they could only make do with their rudimentary medical skills. One of the ambushing archers ran over to Yixiao's side, clutching a blood-staunching bandage in hand, but when this man saw his broken arm, he was stunned for quite a while before saying, "Your whole arm is shattered, I don't know how to bandage that." "Don't worry, it'll work as long as you staunch the blood," Yixiao guaranteed. "How do you staunch a wound like this?" the archer asked. Yixiao was about to faint. "Just bandage it as best as you know how." This archer nodded. Randomly picking up a stick from the ground and splitting it in 2 to make a splint for Yixiao's broken arm, he wound the bandage around the arm quickly, to secure the forearm within the gauze, casually tied a dead knot, and hung it around Yixiao's neck. "There's bound to be sequela if I've made a mistake," the archer worryingly informed. "Don't worry. When the time comes, I shall visit the healer NPC to make a full recovery," Yixiao told the man. With how crudely this man had set his arm back and bandaged him, it was quite miraculous for his bleeding to have actually been staunched. However, Yixiao knew that it was not due to his amazing handiwork but was mainly due to the aid players received from the system's correction, just like how it would correct the aim when players were shooting their bow and arrows. The system did not care for absolute accuracy from the players in terms of their proficiencies, so it was fine as long as the gist of the work was done. Now that the bleeding had stopped, Yixiao's HP halted its drop, and 2 heals after brought him back to full HP. He then hurriedly ate some fruit to replenish his mana. Once the archer saw that Yixiao was fine, he immediately moved to return to the fray. With the firepower of the 3 archers' coordinated crossfire, they managed to extricate Broken Water Arrow and Sniper God from their respective close-quarter combat with Gufei and Eternal Dominion. After gaining some distance with their retreat, Sniper God and Broken Water Arrow pulled out their bow and crossbow, joining in to begin firing at once. The 5 archers were now working together to bring their high mobility and marksmanship into play in this moving skirmish with the 2 kung fu practitioners. Gufei could still keep up with them as his movement speed was not too far off from theirs. The opposing party did not dare to be too wanton with him, but it was a different story for Eternal Dominion. He had a much harder time since his movement speed was not anywhere near any of those 5 archers, and they were constantly on the move as their projectiles flew relentlessly. It was clear that they intended to kiting him to death. Yixiao knew that he might become a burden at such a time, so he withdrew to one corner as he munched on his fruit, ultimately making sure neither Gufei nor Eternal Dominion would be within walking distance to finish him off. On the other front of this battle, the pressure on young Master Han and the others had alleviated with the departure of the 3 archers, and all of their fighting spirit surged after witnessing Sword Demon single-handedly eviscerate 2 of their ambushers at one go. Meanwhile, their enemies were also feeling uneasy after witnessing Sword Demon's fierce assault when he appeared out of nowhere, so they sent out 2 of their men over to that white rock Sword Demon had hidden behind. "It's our turn now," young Master Han exhorted deeply. "I'm sure everyone has already noticed it from Sword Demon's action," young Master Han said. "These people are indeed indomitable when it comes to combat, but it is precisely because they are so indomitable that they are unable to adjust their mindset so quickly. When it comes to gaming, they are utterly inexperienced. As for how you guys can capitalize on this, I'll leave it to you all to act when the opportunity arises," young Master Han said, and everyone nodded. The number of enemies they would be facing had already decreased. With 3 archers gone, and 2 others leaving to hunt down Sword Demon, who had killed off 2 of their comrades, the originally 16 men was now down to just 9. "Over here," young Master Han commanded. Having identified an easy target to pick on, the whole lot of experts descended on the only remaining priest like ravenous wolves. "Defend!" someone shouted from within the enemy formation. That priest seemed to have gotten a realization of his own from Zioxian's sacrifice as he no longer stood his ground and waited for the enemies to come bully him. Quickly darting deeper into their formation, 2 mages stepped out at the same time and clipped from the left and right, each swinging their arm out in a whirl. This action was very mystifying. Even the mage veterans, Royal God Call and Flame Cinched Clothes, were unable to tell that it was actually them unleashing a spell, only making sense of what happened when they saw a flash of fire form above their heads. "Fuck!" Everyone cursed and dove in every direction to avoid the blow. Some were struck by the spell while others managed to avoid it. Their priests promptly restored everyone's HP as Royal God Call glumly whined, "What sort of motherfucking casting technique was that? Grenade throwing?" Besides Royal God Call, Patty Scent Pastures had already identified the arm-swinging action the 2 mages did. The 2 of them were holding their crossbows with their right hands, and their left hands were raised in a tossing motion while holding their magic staves. They looked like they were about to throw those staves in their hands out, but this was apparently the technique a grenadier would do. Old lightning and thunder, beautifully done. The grenades the 2 mages had thrown scattered young Master Han's lot from converging on the priest, and they were now receiving serious praise from their comrades for what they did. "Charge!" someone gesticulated. Young Master Han and the rest quickly went on guard against the 2 warriors among the troops, only to find all 9 of the enemies collapsing onto them as they came charging in. "Fuck me. That's a charge, too." The whole lot of them cursed. As it turned out, that man was not calling for the warriors to use their charge skill, but for everyone to rush young Master Han's lot. The misunderstanding that sprang from their cultural differences left them cursing like sailors, And just as these 9 men got in position to engage them in close-quarter combat, the intensity of the skirmish further escalated. "Intercept them! They're rushing over here!" Young Master Han shouted. Flame-cinched clothes finally had a chance to show a meaningful performance. Although he had lost and gained levels plenty of times before, he had not once lost any of his equipment and weapon, so that skill he had before could still be used. With a decisive wave of his magic staff, Flame-cinched clothes conjuring up the wall of flames as he followed it up with a descending wheel of flames and a blazing 3,000 inferno without pause. A sea of fire raged, instantly isolating 5 of their enemies from the others. Even though this would only last for a few seconds, the advantage from this change greatly favored young Master Han's side. War Without Wounds and Southern Lone Blade led the charge as they charged the enemy warriors. Royal God Call and Glue kept up a fierce barrage of arrows at the other 2 remaining players, while Brother Assist and Unrivaled Lucky Star helped by bestowing blessings to everyone even as they prepare to run in and engage with the enemies up close. These experts were already aware that contending with these ex-soldiers in terms of park techniques would be akin to suicide, so all they could do was resort to being more unprincipled. The whole lot of them ganged up on their enemies and surrounded them, making it impossible for their targets to escape. Everyone shall fight it out by relying on their superior equipment. This was a method of fighting that these experts despised, but it had become the only option for them to achieve victory. If even Sword Demon was utilizing such a shameless measure, why would any of the others have any qualms about doing this? Aside from Gu Fei and the other kung fu practitioners that were on an entirely different plane, Sword Demon was the greatest expert among them all. One of the enemy warriors came cleaving with his heavy sword in hand, but War Without Wounds did not evade or dodge the attack. He stood stoically and took the damage squarely on his head, while the 2 claymores in his hands impolitely made their way to the man. This person turned his body to the side to avoid the 2 claymores, even as he used this chance to step in closer to War Without Wounds, tossing away the sword he was holding in his hand in favor of grabbing War Without Wounds by his throat. With that accomplished, the man lifted him up and threw him on the ground with a hefty swing of his arm. Brother Assist rushed from behind to provide assistance, but the warrior simply sent his leg out and kicked Brother Assist to displace his balance. Young Master Han rapidly cast 2 heals, one each for War Without Wounds and Brother Assist. On his end, Southern Lone Blade charged forward while he hid behind his shield. This other warrior stepped aside and kicked out at Southern Lone Blade's waist in the same moment that sent him stumbling all over the place. The man came bearing down on him. Surprisingly, the weapon this warrior was holding was actually a dagger. It appeared that these ex-soldiers were far more familiar with handling this type of weapon that were convenient to carry. They had no choice. There were plenty of weapons available in Parallel World, but the dagger was the only weapon they would actually have equipped for actual combat in real life. Just as the staggering Southern Lone Blade managed to find his footing, the warrior, who was coming straight for him, had arrived with a punch, grabbing a hold of Southern Lone Blade's left shoulder in the same moment and executed a stab accurately aimed at his heart. In the end, all Southern Lone Blade did was open both his arms and directly hugged the man tightly. This warrior had allocated quite a bit of his stat points to agility, so his strength was no match for Southern Lone Blade's, and that bear hug caused the warrior's dagger in his left hand to become stuck in the embrace, impossible to be extracted from within. The ex-soldier, who struggled to break free, suddenly head-butted Southern Lone Blade. Blood spurted from Southern Lone Blade's nose. Now angered, he slammed his head back at the enemy's head in retaliation. Since he possessed more strength by comparison, Southern Lone Blade ended up dealing more damage with his headbutt. Their heads had turned into weapons as they kept madly ramming each other with them. It was a particularly tragic sight for all to behold. Young Master Han was pleased with himself as he stood within the formation, his heel drifting over to Southern Lone Blade from time to time, even as he contemptuously gazed at War Without Wounds, who was still lying on the ground. "You're such a waste of space." War Without Wounds had his arm twisted by the warrior after he was slammed on the ground. It was apparent this was a specialized grapple technique, as all War Without Wounds could do was lie there in the dirt right now, unable to use any strength in that twisted arm. He was still unable to turn his body around, and the only thing his other hand could grab hold of was air. "I'll have it out with you." Seeing that Southern Lone Blade's technique appeared to be effective, Royal God Call immediately stopped firing his arrows as he bolted over and went lunging at that warrior. This warrior was also fast and agile. Spinning around with a punch, his fist made Royal God Call see stars when it connected as he lunged in midair, an arc escaping his mouth when he landed on the ground. However, throwing out that punch gave War Without Wounds' twisted arm a moment of reprieve. War Without Wounds quickly exerted strength, and that warrior, who had spent points to agility just like his comrades, could only face tragedy against the barbaric War Without Wounds as he was pulled down to the ground with a ruthless tug right there on the spot. War Without Wounds then flipped this person around and straddled the man's back. He did not have that technique the warrior previous demonstrated, which allowed him to keep someone down on the ground with a twist of the opponent's arm. So the only thing War Without Wounds could do was rely on this rather shameless method of using his weight to pin that warrior down. That ex-soldier being straddled by War Without Wounds almost fainted over from his exasperation. His strength was no match for War Without Wounds, and now that he was being ridden by the man, how was he supposed to get up? War Without Wounds laughed uproariously. Unsheathing a claymore, he was about to chop down when a thief came diving out from the side to stab him. War Without Wounds simply paid no heed to this attack. This thief could stab his target, and War Without Wounds would stab his as well. This left the thief feeling demoralized to the point he was faint with anger, lamenting about the situation that he was in. Meanwhile, during the process of this chaotic brawl between both parties, the lack of a priest actually doing his job among these ex-soldiers became a huge disadvantage these men had not foreseen. War Without Wounds and Southern Lone Blade were duking it out punch for punch, but they had the support of young Master Han, allowing their HP to remain filled up this whole time. In contrast, although the ex-soldiers had priests on their side, this was a job class that just happened to have no experience with, no matter how much actual combat experience they had accumulated. The only priest they had among them was truly too much of a novice when it came to gaming. Even having 5 of them would be incomparable to the efficiency that a single young Master Han could demonstrate. Yizia might be better than this priest, but he was still quite a distance away, having only begun rushing over with his broken arm after he noticed just how dismal things were going on this end. Besides these 4, there was still another ex-soldier with the fighter job class present who was busy punching unrivaled Lucky Star, Patty Scent Pastures, and Verdant Timber around. However, it was useless, since these were just merely punches, and that could not kill any of them. 2 out of the 3 present were priests, so even if he had a good handle over the fight and was able to interrupt the priests' heals at the right time, there was no way he could interrupt both their heals at once. Additionally, the amount of game experience these ex-soldiers had was tragic, and none of them were able to discern whether a priest was casting their spells or otherwise. Quickly save them. The fight was getting rowdy on this end, but those enemies that had been blocked by flame-singed close spells on the other end were finally able to circle over. They were currently out in the flat plains and not the streets, so there was no way that he could seal them off completely. Seeing the 4 men round about one after another, Flame-Singed Clothes no longer dared to keep his spells up as he scrambled to join with the rest of the group. These experts had never fought such a park that was so lacking in conduct. Especially Southern Lone Blade and War Without Wounds. The former had his whole face bloodied from being headbutted, and the latter ate a face full of dirt. Fortunately, both men ultimately saw a huge reversal to their fates, and they managed to seize the 2 warriors respectively through very shameless means, overwhelming the 2 ex-soldiers until their HP dropped to 0. Flame-Singed Clothes came running over to his comrades as 2 knights and 2 mages trailed after him. War Without Wounds and Southern Lone Blade were now brimming with confidence after their battle, with the former wiping off the mud and dirt on his face and the latter doing the same with his bloody face, exchanging a quick smile. It's good to have strength. With that, the 2 men dashed right toward the 4 men with every intention to kill. This time, finding their weapons to be a hassle, they simply stowed them away into their pockets as they transformed into wrestlers, running toward their enemies in an effort to hug them. However, having witnessed the miserable fates of their warrior comrades, none of these 4 dared to be careless. Nobody gave these 2 the chance to get anywhere near them as they began to engage in a moving skirmish, throwing a kick, punch, or stab with their daggers every now and then. But since War Without Wounds and Southern Lone Blade had the benefit of a priest's support behind them, this method of fighting was no more than a waste of time as it achieved nothing. The anxiety these expert gamers was feeling slowly eased, for this was not as difficult as they originally thought it to be. They could only blame the fact that Gu Fei's existence had left them extremely deep psychological scars. Nevertheless, there was a very important truth here, and that was how none of them possessed anything like Moonlit Nightfalls, which meant that their enemies did not have the terrifying damage output that Gu Fei possessed. Priests were essentially made redundant when faced against the indomitable Gu Fei's attack power, but because this battle here had priests, they were more than enough to sustain and remain undefeated no matter how fatigued they looked. Target their priests first. Yi Xiaoyu, who had managed to make his way at this time, felt helpless upon seeing how chaotic and divided everybody was. Receiving this instruction, these ex-soldiers immediately realized the situation that they were in. If they did not take care of the priests first, they would just end up in an endless fight. In the end, after making this decision, 2 out of the remaining troops asked, "Which ones are the priests?" "Singed, bombard away." Young Master Han ordered. Flame-singed clothes was stunned, only realizing in the next moment young Master Han was attempting to fully press on their advantage of having priests to the point of sheer shamelessness. With not a moment's hesitation, he began blanketing the area in flames. He paid no heed to friend or foe and just enveloped everybody in the ensuing firestorm. War Without Wounds and Southern Lone Blade, who were inspired by this, rolled up their sleeves to begin executing their cyclones. Slashing about recklessly, they no longer bothered with who would end up getting caught up in that dance of steel. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Royal God Call, who nearly became a casualty of War Without Wounds' whirling blades, broke out in a cold sweat as he ran toward young Master Han. Royal God Call reckoned that no matter how impudent War Without Wounds was, there was no way he would dare to come slashing at young Master Han. The chaotic confrontation both parties were caught up in had already devolved to the point that it was just an indiscriminate fight to the death. Even these ex-soldiers appeared to be helpless facing against such hooligans. Yi Xiaoyu wanted to come over and lend a hand, but just as he was about to close in on them, Glue appeared from thin air and sent an arrow flying right at him, giving him quite a scare. That was when he realized that there was nothing much he could help with even if he was present. He had never been much of a powerful expert, and considering how he was currently handicapped, and how exceedingly powerful all these experts' equipment was, he could tell a casual stab from any of these expert gamers was all it would take to finish him off. His arrival would only create even greater havoc. Yi Xiaoyu was caught between a rock and a hard place. Seeing that his team would end up dying to this shameless hooliganism, he had no choice but to send a message to Broken Water Arrow. "The situation is no longer in our favor. Let's all retreat first." Broken Water Arrow and the 4 other archers with him were currently having quite an easy time dealing with Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion. Besides that time when a certain someone nearly got caught following Gu Fei's use of blink to cover the distance, none of them was, strictly speaking, in any sort of danger. Still, they could see with their eyes what was happening on the other side, and none of them had thought their comrades would have such a hard time engaging in a melee game. Broken Water Arrow could tell that they would not be making any headway if this continued, so after a short discussion with Sniper God, he made the final decision. "Let's retreat. A protracted battle here would only make matters worse." Looking at things now, while they held a little advantage in this brawl as the ex-soldiers fought, the lack of decent damage output meant that there was no way they could defeat any of their enemies. With the order given, none of them should have any trouble extricating themselves. After all their men quickly congregated, Old Lightning and Thunder tossed out 2 spells, as if lobbing grenades again, and went over to carry off Yi Xiaoyu like a handicapped person. The 5 archers, who were currently the best at demonstrating their strength, speed, technique, dexterity, and awareness, were tasked with bringing up the rear, firing arrows to prevent Gu Fei and the others from mounting any sort of pursuit even as they provided cover to the others to quickly withdraw from the battle. "Fuck, where do you think you're going?" Royal God Call leapt to his feet and wanted to give chase, but young Master Han merely threw the boy a side eye. "You can go after them yourself. Let's all go." Royal God Call was eager. "We don't have the agility." Southern Lone Blade said before he dropped to the ground and lay there. How tiring. Having been a gamer for such a long time, this park was truly the most tiring battle he had experienced thus far. Chapter 626, Terminator. The biggest advantage of having agility lay in a player's ability to run off if they were losing against their opponent. Even someone like Yizia, who should be a normal player, also possessed higher agility than most priests. Perhaps he had allocated points to it when he leveled up, or perhaps it was from his equipment, but the fact remained that he would not become the shortest stave in the barrel. After seeing the mobility their enemies possessed, Southern Lone Blade was the first to give up any thought of chasing and promptly lay down on the ground. War Without Wounds was the next to follow, dropping heavily down to the ground. Tired. True lethargy. This feeling of relief they felt was evidently due to the great release they had experienced after that high-strung fight. As for the physical exhaustion they were experiencing, it was really nothing compared to the huge sorting of letters and subsequent replying to those letters that they had all gone through before. Still, when speaking of mental fatigue, no one would surpass what young Master Han had experienced. As the chaotic battle unfolded, especially after those ex-soldiers began their indiscriminate barrage of arrows, young Master Han did not let up in the least as he healed everyone there. Both the priests Patty Scent Pastures and Verdant Timber could feel themselves getting faint just watching him at work. This sort of exhaustion young Master Han experienced as a result of high degree of concentration he expended could even affect his physical body. After he sighed in relief, young Master Han had immediately pulled out a bottle of liquor and began quaffing it as if his life depended on it. It's too frightening. Patty Scent Pastures and Verdant Timber stared at the preposterous priest. In their minds, they had already come to a different conclusion. If the 7 of us were to go up against young Master's elite, even without that ridiculously powerful 1,000 miles drunk on their side, we might still have a hard time eking out a win, and that's because there's another ridiculous individual among them. Excluding Gufei, the two parties might be on par with one another in all the other aspects, but when it came down to their priest, Patty Scent Pastures and Verdant Timber were convinced that they would lose against young Master Han. Having just experienced an intense fight, nobody said a word as they rested. Even Gufei, the battle fanatic that he was, did not give chase. While he might have enough agility for him to pursue and cause trouble to the lot of them, he was well aware that he could not achieve much against Yizio and that team of ex-soldiers just by himself. It would not be enough even if he included Eternal Dominion as well, since their enemies this time were no ordinary players. Everyone stood there blankly, watching that bunch of players slip away. Finally, Brother Assist snapped out of the stupor and looked around. Where's Sword Demon? The thief had previously been hiding behind a rock when the enemies sent a thief and a fighter after him. They had not heard anything from him since then. Everyone quickly turned around and ran to that rock, yet they saw no signs of anyone about. Sword Demon, where are you? Brother Assist hailed across the mercenary channel. I'm back. Sword Demon returned the message. You died? Brother Assist was astonished. Nope. Sword Demon answered. Then, where are you? I can already have you guys in my sight. Sword Demon said. Everyone looked all about and saw Sword Demon's figure slowly appear as he dropped off his stealth. Where are those 2 that were sent after you? Everyone felt a shiver run up their spines, wondering to themselves if they had been eliminated by Sword Demon. War Without Wounds and Southern Lone Blade had spent so much effort killing off those 2 warriors, so they had a deep understanding of just how skilled those ex-soldiers were. Had it not been for the fact that they had a priest that kept their HP topped up with heals, they might have already been on the brink of death themselves by the time they got rid of their respective opponents. Could Sword Demon have fought against those 2 by himself and actually won without the aid of a priest? I lost them. Sword Demon answered even as he made his way to face the others. Lost them? They directly asked him this now that messaging was no longer necessary. Sword Demon nodded. Everyone was speechless, knowing full well what had happened. What else could have happened? Sword Demon must have fled since he had no way of beating the 2 men. He probably had more agility than those 2 chasing him in any case. Where are those 2, anyway? Everyone looked all around, thinking to themselves that Sword Demon could not possibly have lost them so thoroughly that they were nowhere to be found. Royal Godcall gripped his arrow tightly, more than happy to vent by shooting at the 2 stragglers. He had thrown quite a few punches and kicks in that chaotic battle moments before, but he had not gotten the chance to properly get a kill like or without wounds and the others, so he was feeling rather discontented. Those two seem to have gotten lost, Sword Demon replied. Lost? Everyone found this to be strange. Brother Assist and the other members of Young Master's elite turned to look at Royal God Call. Just like Royal here? How's that possible? Young Master Han laughed gaily. Those men were once soldiers, right? Given that these men seem to have had actual combat experience, how can they be geographically challenged like Royal over here? I reckon that they joined the game not too long ago and are temporarily unable to adapt to this environment. Everyone nodded in agreement. They do indeed look like newbies. Plus, they are all getting on in years, so they'll surely be slower acclimatizing to things. But those newbies aren't low level. Brother Assist interrupted. Everyone nodded in agreement. They had all used their appraisal on their opponents when they got the chance, and in terms of their levels, not one of them was below level 40. How could they still be so inexperienced? Even after reaching level 40? Someone suddenly felt that this was somewhat unusual. While level 40 was not first rate in this game, they were not noobs, either. Most would have spent several months just to reach level 40, so how could they still be unfamiliar with the game? They must have just reached level 40, Young Master Han interjected. What makes you say that? It's not the first time that guy came to trouble us. Before, we barely saw him working with anyone aside from Broken Water Arrow. Do you all remember what I said when Sword Demon was first followed? Aside from him, Broken Water Arrow, and Cool Apple, they must have surely been working with someone else, Young Master Han said. They have Silver Moon and No Smile on their side, too. Southern Lone Blade reminded. Back then, Silver Moon hasn't joined him yet. No Smile must have been recruited at around the same time as well, Young Master Han posited. Do you mean to say that those people were already around at this time, except that they were too low level, so they were unable to help out? Brother Assist asked. That's exactly right. Young Master Han nodded. It's been some time since then. Brother Assist recalled. But if they started the game then, wouldn't it be a little too outrageous for them to reach level 40 now? They might not have been level 0 back then, and perhaps they were in their 30s. Anyway, the point I'm making is that ever since that guy made the decision to rectify Miles, it's been his plan to field this squad to help him achieve his goal. Everyone here could tell after looking. Yeah, I'm certain none of those men has any gaming experience, so they might have begun playing the game solely for this matter with Miles. As for who might be their middleman, I reckon it should be Broken Water Arrow. Among all those men, he's the only one who was coincidentally friends with that Fleeting Smile. As such, Fleeting Smile must be hoping that he could get all those old comrades of his to jump into the game and help deal with Miles. These men focused on leveling the moment they got in the game, and given their military background, there's no need for me to mention just how powerful they are, right? Furthermore, they possess martial arts prowess much better than the average gamers and have someone like Fleeting Smile helping them. If I remember correctly, didn't Brother Assist mention before that Fleeting Smile was ranked number 1 on the experience efficiency leaderboard? Even Miles is ranked under him, Young Master Han analyzed. Miles only plays 3 hours a day, Royal God Call countered. Do you even know what efficiency means? Young Master Han scorned sarcastically, continuing, plus, if those guys grinded as a party, I doubt that there's any normal player out there that can beat them in terms of teamwork. In any case, they're not your average gamers, so we can't use common sense with them. That whole bunch of uncles, spending so much time playing games, don't they have work to do? Royal God Call whined. What are you worrying on their behalf for? His comment was met with derision again. All you need to know is that the enemies we are currently up against are really prickly. The result of today's fight isn't too bad. Brother Assist expressed his gratification. None of us died, but 5 of their men died by our hands. You're being too optimistic. It's evident that those men are handicapped. Having regarded the game so simply, their focus was only on gaining levels the moment they started playing Parallel World. Their goal just might have been to reach level 40. After all, the difference between the advanced job classes upon reaching that level and 39 was heaven and earth, which was why these men were in a hurry to strike once they reached level 40. But after this confrontation, they would more or less gather that this game isn't as simple as they first thought. that there is a set of rules they need to follow, and they need to change their way of thinking. Thusly, young Master Han said, accumulate EXP, change their mentality, all that should take a bit of time. Brother Assist said, if they had to accumulate that by themselves, then naturally it would take time, but it seems that Fleeting Smile already have it all prepared. Young Master Han said, oh, cool apple. Just his park value is up in the thousands. Who else could have more experience when it comes to park than him? Young Master Han asked. So you mean to say that Cool Apple was recruited to be their instructor? Everyone was astonished. Young Master Han nodded. But if that's the arrangement he had in mind, what's the point of him harassing us before? You will have to consider this from his perspective. His foolish pursuit for balance. Brother Assist, fill in. Brother Assist was glum. It was illogical, but he involuntarily began filling in. He could not help it. His gossipy nature was just that vicious once it was lit, and there was no way that he could sleep if he did not make sense of what happened. Everyone looked at Brother Assist as he seemingly tried to think like Fleeting Smile. No one dared to make a sound and disturb him. After a good while, Brother Assist came back to his senses, and seeing that everyone was looking expectantly at him, he got very dispirited, but he had to say something. That man said himself that he's looking to rectify the bug, which is Miles, so if you step into his shoes and think about things, Miles' existence in the game is viewed as a danger to the game itself. As such, the actions he took against us might be his way of keeping Miles in check. Plainly put, he's trying to keep Miles busy to prevent him from having nothing to do and doing something game-breaking like what he had in mind. Then, from his perspective, isn't what he's been doing game-breaking as well? Gathering all those men who could quickly rise to level 40, War Without Wounds said. He's fighting fire with fire, Royal Godcall quipped. Gufei raised his hand and gave the back of his head a loud slap, leaving Royal Godcall despondent. He has all those game-breaking players in his command, anyway. Once he's done with rectifying Miles, they'll all quit the game. Wouldn't the game-breaking aspect that he has mentioned be gone, then? Brother Assist countered. Why is it that this plot sounds so familiar? War Without Wounds scratched his head. Terminator 2. The Terminator killed himself after terminating the other Terminator. Flame Singed Clothes said. Damn, Terminator? Everyone sneered. Flame Singed Clothes' example here is a rather appropriate. Brother Assist commended. With that he turned to the others. I think that's more or less the situation here. I wonder what state he intends to reduce Miles to before he considers him as rectified. They were all curious. I'll ask him. Gufei was similarly curious about this. You're not about to compromise, are you? They asked. Others might be unaware, but these friends of his were well aware that, as long as the problem was not a matter of principles, Gufei would actually be very easily convinced. If what he says makes sense, then I'll be the Terminator. Gufei said. What do you mean? Everyone was confused. It means he'll be killing them all before terminating himself, Brother Assist explained. No, don't. A whole bunch of them surrounded Gufei. We're still depending on you for our future wages. Southern Lone Blades Gang was the loudest of these. After finally finding themselves such a good boss, only for it to end so soon, they had no idea if they were being played right now. We'll talk about it after I ask him. Gufei sighed. But I'm almost 80% certain he's not going to reply. Gufei said that even as he sent a message to Yixiao, he originally wanted to ask what that man actually wanted to achieve, but upon thinking that he would habitually not reply to his messages, he changed his line of thought and sent him a message to meet at a certain tavern in Beishi City, instead. No matter if that man would reply or otherwise, Gufei decided that he would head over there and wait for his arrival. I've set up an appointment for us to meet. Gufei told the rest. Are you insane? They were all surprised. Wouldn't he use this chance to surround you? Brother Assist asked. So be it. Gufei was unperturbed. I might have a little trouble killing all of them, but I doubt it would be difficult for me to escape. We'll go with you. The others decided. There's no need. Having all of you there will make it seem as if I were afraid of him. Gufei rejected. This isn't the time to act like a hero. The rest persuaded. What do you mean act? Gufei asked back. Aren't I the hero? Silence descended upon them all before Brother Assist answered with much difficulty a good moment later. Fine. In this game, you can consider yourself as that. Gufei nodded in satisfaction. Do you want me to accompany you? Eternal Dominion asked. No need. Gufei patted him lightly. You poor folks are better off running along and research what our next step to our tutoring business. Fuck. Eternal Dominion was despondent, and so were Southern Lone Blade and his team. Let's all disband for now and head off to tend to our business. Gufei announced. We're all still heading back to the city. Everyone made their derision known. Will they have some sort of ambush waiting for us on the way back? Brother Assist began to worry. No. If they had another ambush prepared, they wouldn't have dispersed like that, young Master Han concluded. Arranging for a face-to-face meeting might actually be a good plan to turn the trap on them, Brother Assist said before quickly explaining himself when he saw Gufei's baleful side-eye. Hey. Just saying. Young Master Han, however, shook his head. This isn't a matter that can be resolved with killing. Eh? The goals are different. Those guys don't even mean to play this game and have all gathered just to go up against Miles. What effect do you think beating them down will do? Young Master Han asked. Looks like Miles understands this as well, which is why he opted to have a dialogue, young Master Han said. Brother Assist looked at Gufei, yet he saw him burying his head low, focused on the road without a word. He had no idea if he heard a word they had said. Over in Beishi City, Yixiao and those men had already made it back, and after they met up with the others who had died and was there before them, the whole lot of them were now observing a good moment of dead silence. This has been a lesson. Sniper God was the first to break this silence. A lesson that cost us our blood, comrades. What does the saying "the conceited soldiers are doomed for defeat" mean? The enemies didn't even suffer a single casualty but had managed to kill off 5 of ours, instead. What are your thoughts, gentlemen? Silence. This is now a new environment we're operating in. Everyone needs to quickly acclimatize to it, or we'll simply recreate the joke of a battle we just had together. Sniper God continued. Sir, yes sir. Everybody's expression went stern. It had been years since they retired, but the habits they picked up as soldiers remained. This one cry demonstrated their obedience and determination, which was sonorous and forceful. Introduce that friend of yours that has plenty of experience doing battle in games and refer our names so we can get in touch with him. Sniper God turned and said this to Yixiao. Alright, I'll get on it, Yixiao said. Old Breaker, Xioshan, Daong, Old Bull, Big Cannon. You 5 shall focus on quickly getting back to level 40, Sniper God commanded. Sir, yes sir. These 5 named, 2 warriors, fighter, thief, and priest, were the same individuals who had lost their lives in the last battle. These men all nodded, turning around immediately and leaving to level. Lau and Rocket have gotten lost. Who's going to go and lead them back? Sniper asked. I'll go. Only Broken Water Arrow out of this lot had any knowledge when it came to this game. Broken Water Arrow was about to get up when Yixiao received Gufei's message to have a meeting. Stunned, he said, 1,000 Miles Drunk has just invited me to have a face-to-face dialogue with him. Is that the mage? Sniper God asked. Yes. How bold, Sniper God complimented. When is it? Broken Water Arrow asked. He said 8 p.m. later tonight, Yixiao answered. Then, we shall go meet him. It would be best if he takes the initiative to step down, Broken Water Arrow said. Yixiao nodded, only for Sniper God to exclaim, then, wouldn't we have spent all this time leveling for nothing? Yeah, then all of you can be honorably discharged yet again, Broken Water Arrow said. Fuck, you bastard. Why haven't you guys talked things out when you could have done so earlier? Sniper God cursed. Even Japan had to take 2 atomic bombs before they announced their surrender, Broken Water Arrow remarked. Are you saying that our mad rush to level 40, without heeding day or night, had all just been for you to use as deterrence? Sniper God blurted out. Sun Tzu's Art of War, an army that boasts 100 victories from 100 battles is great, but the greatest victory is one which requires no battle, Broken Water Arrow recited. Are you looking for a beating? Sniper God was incensed. What Old Broken said isn't wrong. It was at this time when someone more experienced and prudent from within the squad expressed his support for Broken Water Arrow. Old Sniper, you've still got a lot to improve, intelligence-wise. That's right. We're all getting on in years, And you still went with a name like Sniper God, aren't you just a tad bit immodest? Ha 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 ha. Everyone joked as they chastised their fellow squad mate. Sniper God was not their officer back in the days, so he was not subjected to the respect that came from a subordinate relationship. Everyone replying "Sir, yes sir" to his words before was simply because what he had said made sense, and everybody habitually resounded accordingly. Now that they were feeling that Sniper God was the one being unreasonable, all of them instantly turned to mock him. "Have you forgotten what Staff Officer Zoo said about you back in the day?" Another old soldier reenacted from memory a scene he recalled, pacing around as he imitated, "Ah, that Zoyang comrade is a crackshot, but why doesn't he like to read books? Without reading any books, he just isn't too clever, so how is he going to improve his knowledge?" No modern soldier can avoid that anymore. Chapter 627, The Unlucky Guild. Gu Fei and the others arranged for their classes to begin at 4 a.m., each class lasting a whole hour for a total of 4 hours. It was already past 8 a.m. when everything was done and they got ambushed on the way back to the city. Even though the fight was fierce, the entire battle in fact only lasted no more than a dozen or so minutes. It was only 9 a.m. by the time they reached the city. Since Gu Fei refused their help for the meeting, all of them decided to log off back in the city. In the end, they all saw Gu Fei following them to a designated log-off point. "Didn't you arrange to meet that guy?" Royal God Call found this to be strange. "I didn't say I'll meet him right away," Gu Fei said. "Then, when do you intend to do it?" Royal God Call asked. "Tonight." "What if our dialogue deteriorates to the point that we end up fighting?" "I should first log off and recuperate myself," Gu Fei answered. Royal God Call felt chilled upon hearing this. Somehow, the dialogue Gu Fei had arranged was lacking in sincerity. Why does it seem that this meeting will very likely devolve into a fight? He's truly a park maniac. However, everything that was happening in the game were not resolved just because Gu Fei and the others went offline. A new round of grinding map scramble began once the lessons over by the White Mill ended. What Brother Assist had deduced would happen unfortunately came to pass. Plenty of players, who had taken their lessons, were members of large guilds. So after memorizing what they had learned, they quickly proceeded to organize players from their guilds to learn. This time, the guilds involved were not merely those from Beishi City but those from the neighboring cities, as well as some faraway guilds. Initially, these men gathered ignored if they were even intending to gather their own guildmates to grind here, resolving to learn the routine first before making any decisions in any case. In the morning, it was mainly still the local guilds that first got their groups ready on site to learn this routine, but by the time noon arrived, guilds from the adjacent cities, like Yuan Linian, began showing up, and later on, guilds hailing from cities further off started populating the grinding map. This time, players were not as uncoordinated and unprincipled as was the case in the wilderness camp. Guilds were ready to wage war the moment they set foot in the grinding map with their members, as the unaffiliated players knew just exactly how to act in such a delicate situation and let them pass without a fight. Meanwhile, the guilds who were acquainted with each other had already coordinated beforehand, splitting up the territory without sparing another word among themselves. Conversely, the guilds who were not acquainted were not in a rush to get into a fight, opting to have a seat and properly discuss the matter thoroughly. Instead, in the end, the entire grinding map was split up in a rather orderly fashion, with each guild taking up their own turf. The unaffiliated players could only bear with everything with a grim smile as they shared the area that was left with the other unaffiliated players. Everyone was unhappy about the outcome, but none of them could do anything about it. They were not even in the mood to steal from one another any longer. With all of them clustered in the area, their numbers more than the monsters spawning, the efficient leveling that they had imagined was essentially just empty words. Additionally, even though the guilds had brought plenty of players along as well, they were all organized. While there was still far from enough monsters available for the entire guild to grind, they did not have that many people over at any one time. Initially having just 500 to 300 players grinding there, they sent a different batch every hour, allowing everyone to experience the triple EXP gain in that 1 hour. It was at least better than those scattered unaffiliated players who could see yet never experience any of it for themselves. It was a delicate balance between the various guilds, with everyone conscientiously holding down their turf and no one encroaching upon each other's stake. Because the strength of the guilds present were about the same, no one could defeat and swallow up another guild. In the event a fight do break, the two parties fighting would only end up damaging each other, which was bound to only benefit a third party. Instead, the various leaders of the guilds could already identify the stakes at play. In any case, they had already secured their guild's grounds, so what was there to make a fuss about? Everyone tacitly understood that none of the guilds was holding a spot significantly larger than the others, so the number of monsters they got was about the same, so none was really complaining. Feeling that this sort of harmony was not too bad for all those involved, these guild leaders resolved to form a defensive alliance with the other guilds that were also currently presiding in the map, with everyone agreeing that any guild that came later would not be allowed to join in, and any potential troublemakers would end up facing a concerted attack from all these guilds if they pose a threat to the status quo. This alliance was quite similar to the pact formed by the stores that populated the beach in Linshui City, and this compact was finalized that same afternoon of the same day. From then on, there would just be a total of 12 guilds, with most mainly from Beishi and a few from Wei, Linian, and Baofeng cities, stationed in the White Mill grinding map. The 10 Guild Alliance from Wei City happened to be one of the 12 present. Although the 10 Guild Alliance comprised 10 guilds, the outside world already considered them to be a single guild. With around 4,000 players amid their ranks, they were significantly stronger than the average level 6 guild. But Dusky Cloud did not intend to monopolize the grinding map just because of it. He was no fool and could tell that doing something so tyrannical would end up inviting the ire of the masses in the face of this scenario. The 10 Guild Alliance might be strong, but dominating their own city was hard enough as it was. Now that they were outside, Dusky Cloud could clearly see how illogical it would be to dream of trying to hold back all these major guilds from the many different cities out there. If these guilds became desperate enough to form a temporary alliance of 10 guilds, with 10 level 6 guilds numbering over 10,000 players in total, what use would his 10 guild alliance be, then? Thus, when he saw how everyone was united and had amicably divided the grinding map, Dusky Cloud very cheerfully slotted himself in with the lot. As for these other guilds, they had long heard of the untrammeled nature of Wei City, how the players there were tempered in the flames of Park, and how the 10 Guild Alliance was the largest organization of players across Parallel World, so they were originally thinking that this alliance's arrival would be like that of a raging typhoon. Never did they expect the guild to comply with the tentative rules and provisions they had set for the grinding map. Nonetheless, Dusky Cloud still raised the issue of his guild being bigger compared to others and his hope of the others carving out an area proportionate to his immense numbers. Observing the beliefs of equality and fraternity, Dusky Cloud's request was not particularly excessive, and adding to the fact that all the guild leaders had no wish to butt heads with the 10 Guild Alliance, Dusky Cloud was able to secure turf 4 times larger than those level 6 guilds. With Dusky Cloud setting the precedent of taking more based on the number of people they had, the others quickly thought the smaller guilds should receive less. As a result, the other guilds below level 6 were reallotted smaller areas accordingly. While Dusky Cloud noted that the grinding map was divided proportionally among the 12 guilds, this did not mean that there would not be more guilds coming afterward. Dusky Cloud's men arrived at the place near noon after leaving Wei City early in the morning. Players and guilds from faraway cities would still be on their way here at this time and would likely arrive at around 2 or 3 p.m. To prevent the grinding map from being further cut up by newcomers, Dusky Cloud suggested a collaboration between the 12 guilds. He was the 10 Guild Alliance's big boss, after all, so he was well versed when it came to such formation of alliances. This suggestion was met with resounding approval by the other 11 guilds, and had originally been a collaboration between the 3 major guilds in Beishi City turned into a cooperation between these guilds that hailed from the 3 cities. With each guild getting a piece of the pie upon arrival, the 3 large swathes of land quickly got cut up into 12 portions. Everyone was pretty pained by the act. They were all aware of the issue that Dusky Cloud had raised. Who could really be happy just thinking about how the grinding map further divided as more guilds arrived? Thus, when Dusky Cloud made this suggestion, everyone applauded and stood up in support of it. With 12 guilds working together, they now possessed the impetus to challenge the world and resolved not to give way to any other guild. This time, When some of the smaller guilds arrived and saw that the larger guilds had already inducted all the collaborators they needed, they no longer dared to use the pretext of a guild to approach. By the time it was nearly 3 p.m., as everyone had expected, the guilds from beyond the adjacent cities descended, and the first one to arrive was the Blue Umbra Guild from Linshui City. Seeing the grounds clearly divided between the guilds already present, the guild leader Tanzanite Shade could tell at a glance what was going on. However, he did not realize that these people had drawn out their turf only after an amicable agreement with one another. The man treated the grinding map like an all-you-can-eat buffet and, thinking that a guild could easily carve out their spot however they liked, led his guild to venture into the territory where no one had laid claim of. The area where no one had laid claim was where all the unaffiliated players grinded, and it was, generally speaking, a significantly larger turf than even what Dusky Cloud's 10 Guild Alliance had to themselves. This was an area that the 12 guilds had intentionally left behind after dividing up the map among themselves, for they had no wish to be too odious. They had to at least leave something for those independent players, guildless. In this grinding map, there was no comparison as to just how many players there were inside this area. Most of them were there to try their luck and see if there was any monster that would coincidentally spawn right beside them. They were completely dependent on chance and yet were still unwilling to leave. Tanzanite Shade was not aware at first, but beyond the area of the collaborators lay the free market. Casually grabbing what he could, he led his men to carve out his turf in this grinding map and get a huge slice of the pie. This was a huge misstep on his part. When Tanzanite Shade saw how the 12 guilds grinded so carefreely, he was misled into believing this to be a grinding map that anyone could just farm as they pleased. How was he to know that there were plenty of caveats to the equilibrium they had achieved, anyway? Actually, the area that the unaffiliated players had to grind was originally huge and was no different from the turf that the 3 major guilds originally held, which was why the individual players did not care for much at the start. But when guild after guild arrived thereafter, this area slowly got shaved off bit by bit. It was only after Dusky Cloud and his men showed up and ended up with a grinding spot 4 times bigger than the average guild did the individual players realize how much smaller their space had gotten. This was a frog boiling in warm water death method, as the area they could grind in slowly got swallowed without them realizing it. By the time they wanted to speak up, they found that, because they were all individuals of different backgrounds, there was no leader among them to voice out their grievances to the guilds, so all they could do was bear with this injustice. Hence, when Tanzanite Shade and his men came brazenly running into this spot to begin pulling monsters everywhere, everybody had had enough of enduring. They were like barrels of gunpowder that exploded at the slightest touch as someone detonated into a litany of curses directed at Tanzanite Shade. Tanzanite Shade, who had not realized what was happening even at this point, angrily wondered to himself, why are these people only scolding us and not the dozen other guilds? Are they looking down on yours truly? He decisively ordered his men to surround and kill the loudest dissenters, intending to make an example out of them for the crowd to show that he was no pushover. However, the problem was that the number of players in this crowd was no longer in the hundreds. With how large the grinding spot was, no matter how indomitable this example of his looked, a good number of players could not witness it, but they all heard the word spread. Fuck. Another guild came, and they're horrible, killing people the moment they set foot here. Damn. Even the 10 Guild Alliance didn't do anything like that when they arrived. Just who the heck would act so imperiously? Kill them. The place is already so cramped. Any more of this, and there won't be anything for us to play with. Kill, kill, kill. As long as there was oppression, there would then be resistance. Actually, the oppression of the guilds already occurred from time to time, and these unaffiliated players had all along been resisting. It was only that the oppression they faced was not too harsh, so their resistance was not necessarily strong, either. Take for example the area that the 12 guilds had previously taken. While the people had been coerced, it was done in such a way that was more of a nudge. Thus, the only resistance everybody put up was the complaints and curses that they held their tongues from unleashing. Now that Tanzanite Shade had acted so barbarically from the get-go, would that not mean a similarly intense resistance would be mounted now that their hands had been forced? These unaffiliated players erupted together, leaving Tanzanite Shade momentarily panicked. In the end, It was already too late to back out from the fight, so he had no choice but to organize his men and receive the incoming attackers. During the group park battle, the difference between the organized and disorganized, the group with tacit understanding between members and the group without, was simply too huge. Though there were plenty of unaffiliated players, they were pitted against a guild which had organization and cooperation between members, so these players were unable to surge forth and drown the opposing guild in this battle for the people. Nevertheless, Tanzanite Shade could tell that his side would eventually be overwhelmed if this continued, and that both sides would end up suffering as a result. Unwilling to see that eventuality, he ordered his men to carve out a path of retreat from the ensuing enclosure in preparation to withdraw from the map. But who would have guessed that the 12 guilds would suddenly act upon the news, and had organized their various parties to more effectively surround Tanzanite Shade's guild, killing out a whole bunch of them in that one wave. Tanzanite Shade was alarmed. He was wondering to himself why his fellow comrades, who had managed to snatch their turfs, would suddenly turn on him. Did he misunderstood something somewhere? Stop fighting, we're one of you. The urgency of the matter forced Tanzanite Shade to shout out his plea shamelessly. No, we're doing this for your attempt at seizing this portion of the grinding map. The crowd chided even as their firepower became all the fiercer. Damn, didn't you guys seize your turf as well? Tanzanite Shade bellowed, but his voice could no longer be heard. In the moment he had said stop fighting when he leapt out of the crowd, everybody could tell that he was the leader of this bunch. So 40 to 50 homing projectiles came flying at him from every possible direction and every angle. How could he escape his fate then? This was the most devastating blow to Blue Umbra Guild to date. A total of 748 players took part in this level grinding expedition, and only 35 of them made it back alive, while the rest were all wiped out. Furthermore, those 35 only managed to escape in the nick of time after they shamelessly removed their guild emblem and stashed it into their pockets, allowing them to hide in anonymity, otherwise the entire guild would have all been cleaned up. Yay! The cheers of the players reverberated all throughout the White Mill, celebrating their victory and chasing away those interlopers. Everybody once more returned to their respective grounds to resume their grind. The 12 guilds and the individual players all got along even more harmoniously. These unaffiliated players did not discover that the guilds had surreptitiously slightly increased the size of their turf after that skirmish. There were other guilds that came to the White Mill thereafter, but none of them was as rash as the Blue Umbra Guild. Did they wish to carve out a spot in the grinding map? Even ignoring the 12 guilds, just the glare from the unaffiliated players showed great defiance. This was because they knew that if more guilds arrived, the 12 guilds would work with them to beat up and banish those trespassers from the grinding map. These unaffiliated players were helpless to the guilds taking up most of the map precisely because of their limited strength in the first place. But now that they had the backing of the 12 guilds, why would they be willing to give up their turf? It was only natural for them to stare coldly at these potential invaders. With everyone casting a fierce glare whenever a guild even thought of getting near their space, they forced the other party to beat a hasty retreat upon realizing the potential complication they would face. Having gotten rid of the unlucky Blue Umbra Guild, the White Mill was considerably peaceful and harmonious the entire day. The 12 guilds, inspired by their success here, thought of developing the same thing in the wilderness camp, but they could not help but have mixed feelings about the so-called practices there. The wilderness camp had been up for so many days, and the prevalent style of the players there was barbaric and unruly. What should the 12 guilds do if they were faced with the fierce glares of those barbarians? Should they use their weapons to pacify the masses? After thinking this through, everyone simply figured that there was no need to invite further trouble and finally decided to obediently stick to White Mill and their lot. Instead, sometime after 7 p.m. that same day, Gouffé got online. Pulling out his friends list, he saw many familiar names appear. Fleeting Smile was online as well, so he sent a message over. Are you going or not? Say something, and don't make me wait for naught. I'll be there, Yixiao replied. Until we meet, then. Gouffé was straightforward, heading to that tavern after he sent that message. Everyone on the mercenary channel greeted him, each asking questions like the location of the meetup and if he needed any form of support. Nope. Gouffé calmly rejected all their offers. Just what do you intend to do? Everyone was curious. I just wanna hear what his thoughts are, Gufei answered. So it's going to be a debate about game balance and equilibrium? Everyone guessed. Gufei did not reply to them. He arrived at the tavern at 7:40 p.m. and saw that Yixiao was already waiting for him there. He was not alone, either. Broken Water Arrow was with him. Long time no see. Gufei first greeted them. Yixiao nodded in acknowledgement. What have you been up to these days? Gufei began with some small talk. Yixiao did not say a word to this. Ahem. Gufei took a seat and ordered a glass of liquor. He dove straight to the point. Are game employees allowed to play the game? Why have you been playing so much recently? Gufei already knew that Yixiao was a game employee, but the latter had told him that he was in the game merely to understand certain things better. Furthermore, the man barely spent time online in the game after that first meeting, and it was significantly lesser than Gufei's own. Recently, however, he was acting abnormal. As Gufei spent a bit more time playing the game due to it being the winter holidays, this man plunged into the game, like a professional gamer, and spent insane periods of time in it. I resigned, Yixiao said. Resigned? Why? Gufei asked. Yixiao remained silent. Let's talk about why you called me to this meeting today. Yixiao evaded. It's nothing much, really, Gufei casually spoke. I just want to know why you're so caught up on all these things. Just what do you want to achieve? Haven't I already told you this? Your existence is a threat to the game. You're a game breaker, someone who disrupts the game balance, which is why I need to stop you, Yixiao answered. Stop me? Gufei sighed. How do you intend to stop me? You can't exactly kill me. This is just a game. I'll still be able to plant my feet here in this world. Which is why all I can do is reduce your impact to the barest minimum, Yixiao said. What sort of impact am I making? Gufei smiled. The progression of the game has been disrupted time and again by your actions. The werewolves in Yaguang Village, Giordano in Xiao City. There are many more examples, but all these are catalytic events that end up undermining the overall pace of this game. Your entirely indomitable park skills and that efficient monster grinding routine you've created recently, all these have created quite a degree of chaos among the player base. I know you're a gaming noob, so you're probably unclear of the impact of your efficient monster grinding routine. Ask those friends of yours, they'll probably have greater clarity on this subject, Yixiao elucidated. At first, I thought that it's just the Moonlit Nightfalls and Midnight Spirit Robe that amplified your advantages, so I thought that if I were to get rid of those two items from you, the impact you can make will be under control, but I'm afraid that this recent incident with the efficient monster grinding routine has made me realize that, when it comes to you, the equipment is just the symptoms and not the actual cause. The real cause of your game-breaking existence is that Kung Fu you know, Yixiao said. Kung Fu? Are you saying that I can't play the game because I know Kung Fu? Gufei asked. You can still play, but I just hope that you don't use it to do too many things, Yixiao said. Gufei abruptly got up, a single kick from him overturned the table. Having not predicted his abrupt change in mood, Yixiao was taken aback. Even Broken Water Arrow thought that Gufei was about to strike, so he quickly stepped forward right before him. Swindlers can swindle all they want in games, larcenists may rob equipment and kill indiscriminately as well, the rich can spend their money, the poor can attempt to make their fortune, and even specialized interest groups can make a living here. Yet my Kung Fu isn't allowed? I've devoted over 2 decades of my life to Kung Fu. Forget it. You won't understand even if I tell you about it. At the end of the day, if it's forbidden to use Kung Fu in this game, please inform us of that before opening it to the public. What do you think I play this game for? Is the game even fun if I can't use my Kung Fu? So you insist on it? Nothing can make me give up on Kung Fu, much less doing so for a game. You're too hilarious. Chapter 628, Hide and Seek. Fine, since you insist. Yixiao was despondent. The doors to the tavern were flung open as men came charging in. Gufei casually glanced over and identified these newcomers as those ex-soldiers that had ambushed him and his friends this morning. Gufei chuckled. Taking a deep breath as he calmed himself from his agitation, he slowly pulled out his Moonlit Nightfalls from his dimensional pocket. The tavern patrons had turned over in surprise when Gufei flipped that table with a kick earlier. Now, seeing so many players aggressively charging in all of a sudden, they could all understand just what was going on. In an enclosed space like a tavern, it was not exactly good entertainment to gawk. A mage's spell, an archer's arrows, and even a warrior's cyclone or charge, there was such a high chance for all these skills to accidentally hurt someone in the process of a fight. As such, most players would bolt when they subsequently realized just how bad things could turn out if they stayed. The few who would be willing to risk death just so they could watch a spectacle opted to shrink themselves into the corner of a room, giving the combatants as much space they needed, as best as they could. Negotiations have failed, prepare to assault. These ex-soldiers established a mercenary group as well, and Broken Water Arrow messaged them over the mercenary channel, which they used to communicate wirelessly. The others outside immediately burst through the door of the tavern when they saw the message, their bows, swords, and magic staves at the ready. Spreading out in a shape of a fan, they surrounded Gouffet the moment they stepped inside. Everyone aimed their weapons at him. Fanning out like this meant that those players huddled in the corners of the tavern were included in their scope of protection. At the same time, they made a path for players to get out of the tavern safely. 3 of them assisted in marshalling these players out of the establishment. The way these men ushered people out was as if a terrorist attack were about to happen in the area. Gouffet did not know whether to laugh or cry at this. Would taking a hostage even be useful? None of them answered him. Gouffet suddenly initiated his attack, his sword thrusting out to the person closest to him, Yizia. He was of course not skilled enough to evade the attack from Gouffet, but Broken Water Arrow, who was standing next to the priest, had been vigilant all this while. Seeing Gouffet raise his hand and lash out at Yizia, the 2 men went tumbling down to the ground. If this were any other day, such a crude evasion move would just be begging for Gouffet to pursue and stomp them to death. Right now, however, the situation was different. The ex-soldiers' encirclement was tight, and the moment they saw Gouffet act, someone instantly shouted, "Fire!" Following which, the whole lot of them, no matter their respective job classes were, pulled out their bows or crossbows and began firing at him. Gouffet was already on the lookout for this, so the moment he saw all these men raise their hands, he swiftly rolled over to another table and used it as a shield. Arrows thumped against the wood persistently, turning the table into a porcupine. Gouffet peeked out from behind it and saw that the tavern's 2 entrances were skillfully barricaded by his enemies. As for the back door, this was a system-operated shop in the game, so items were generated no matter what item was being sold. Naturally, it did not have any sort of delivery passage, so there was no need for a back door. The 2 entrances doubled as the exits to this premise, and there was no third option beyond these 2. These ex-soldiers continued to suppress Gouffet with their arrows even as they sent forth a few of their comrades who were adept at close-quarter combat to Gouffet's hiding position. The 2 warriors signaled once they got near, calling for a cessation of the bombardment of arrows, and unsheathed their swords and held it at waist level. With a quick exchange of glance and a nod between the 2 men, both men charged in unison and slammed right into the wooden table. The table obviously could not withstand the combined force of the 2 charge from the 2 warriors, and it got blown into splinters with that assault. The 2 were stunned in the next moment, however, as they clearly saw Gouffet hide behind this table, yet they simply saw no traces of Gouffet at all. Before they could even collect themselves, they felt a wave of heat come right beside them. Hearing their comrades exclaim in shock, "To your left," these 2 men turned in the said direction fast. Alas, at this point, Gouffet had already whirled his twin incineration at them. A 720-degree infernal heat was visited upon them in that very instance. Even though these ex-soldiers were far more skilled than the average gamers out there, the fact that they could be ruthlessly bullied by Southern Lone Blade and war without wounds was evidence of just how plain and common their equipment was. Most warriors might have invested a good portion of their stat points to endurance, yet because they were more inclined to the agility stat, the HP of these 2 men were incomparable to the average level 40 warrior, so when faced against this swell of power from Gouffet's ultimate move, a clean death was the only outcome. After finishing off these 2 men, Gouffet did not even give the others a chance to mount another attack on him, and he simply dove into the safety of a pile of tables at the side. It was hard to tell that someone was hiding in the forest of upright table legs if they did not carefully search the area, but since Gouffet had dived there under the watchful gazes of those present, Everybody more or less had an idea where he was. Before they could open fire, though, Gufei flipped over a good number of tables with his hands and legs. Now, hiding behind all these tables, where none of them could see where he was positioned, he blinked. Yi Xiao realized what had happened there and then. After Gufei had flipped the table over, everyone thought he was still hiding behind the table, and none was aware that he had used a blink while under its cover to rematerialize behind a nearby table. Everyone's attention was on that table they had seen him disappear behind, so nobody noticed this. By the time the two warriors got near and slammed themselves into the table, Gufei was already hiding behind the table next to it and insta-killed them on the spot. Ah! Experience. Yi Xiao sighed. This was yet another mistake they had made as a result of not having enough experience. Using common sense, Gufei would of course be behind that table, but the nearly surreal existence of blink in the game caused these ex-soldiers to once more be entrapped by the game's design, wrongfully sacrificing the lives of two of their comrades in the process. Even Yi Xiao did not think of this when he saw Gufei duck behind the safety of the table. Experience was something that had to be gone through and accumulated. Without it, there would always be unexpected circumstances that could crop up if people merely relied on their intelligence and judgment. Man's imagination was unlimited. Just like how Gufei used blink to slash someone in midair earlier today, and that was something Yi Xiao had not predicted either. Cool Apple indeed acceded to Yi Xiao's request and talked to these ex-soldiers about plenty of his park experience in game, but what he talked about were the clashes and fights he had against normal players. And this was easily miles apart from what clashing with Gufei was like. Going up against Gufei, these ex-soldiers might as well just rely on their combat experience. As for incidents like being fooled by this sort of movement with blink, all they could do was learn from their past mistakes and slowly incorporate it into their combat experience in Parallel World. Grenade. Broken water arrow turned to yell this at Hold Lightning and Thunder. Certain ideas for these ex-soldiers were too ingrained, which made it difficult for them to completely abandon what they understood from their experience as soldiers and adapt to the game world. It would be better to just directly link certain things in the game to what they were already familiar with. It was just like how releasing arrows would be called fire and Mage's AO bombardment would be shouted as grenade. Old Lightning and Thunder stepped forward and slung their spells, following which, two flame wheels came crashing down on where Gufei was hiding. Use a landmine, Broken Water Arrow suggested. They referred to the Blazing Tree of 1,000 Inferno spell as a landmine. Yi Xiao himself felt that the hunting trap of a hunter was similar to a landmine, but these ex-soldiers all agreed that the hunting trap was more like a bear trap, and it was different from a landmine. Considering the power and AO a Blazing Tree of 1,000 Inferno had, it was hard not to call it a landmine. The two men immediately cast Blazing Tree of 1,000 Infernos when they heard that, and that messy pile of tables and stools were set aflame in a sea of fire. Broken Water Arrow very unhappily asked, "Can't you two coordinate your toss of a grenade and a landmine?" They nodded. "In a while. We're out of grenades." This meant that their skill was on cooldown. "Did we get him?" the others asked. After these ex-soldiers, who have had plenty of combat experience, suffered from setbacks upon setbacks while fighting in Parallel World, they discovered that actual combat techniques could not be fully applied to fights in this game. Slowly, they began to waver. They witnessed their enemy hide from them, but despite their numerical superiority, none of them could decide if they should get near or not. Everyone saw Gufei's attack moments ago, and he was able to complete 2 revolutions with a single cast of his twin incineration. They all held their positions in the encirclement, none wishing to let the man kill them off with just one move. Yi Xiao was astonished as well when he recalled an attack Gufei had just unleashed. At first, he thought that the man had used 2 twin incinerations, but in retrospect, he quickly realized that no traces of gaps existed between the 2 revolutions. A twin incineration that didn't dissipate after completing 2 revolutions? How is that possible? Yi Xiao was clueless about the many techniques incorporated in Gufei's execution of twin incineration to make that double pirouette feasible, so it was only natural for him to not understand how it was done no matter how much thought he put into it. Enlarge the encirclement, envelope both flanks. These ex-soldiers deliberated a new plan to engage Gufei, and it was by enlarging their encirclement instead of shrinking it. After increasing their radius, They approached Gouffet's hiding spot from both flanks. In the end, when their eyes came upon the position, disappointment cascaded. "He's gone again." The cooldown for Gouffet's blink had ended in the time it took for them to reach his hiding place, thus, he had once more evaded capture. The distance for blink should be no more than 5 meters. Yi Xiao hurriedly informed the rest. Everyone's expression turned severe as they extended their encirclement radius by 5 meters. Their eyes then began combing the area, yet they still failed to find any traces of Gouffet. He must have repositioned himself after using blink. Broken Water Arrow sighed. In any case, he still has to be somewhere in this tavern. Unfortunately, this tavern was spacious, and the tables around could all be potential hiding places. The steely gazes of these ex-soldiers scoured their surroundings, but all they saw were the wooden legs of the tables, stools, and benches, and soon, they were all giddy from the uniformness. They were all past their prime, so certain aspects of their bodies struggled to compete with the young ones. "The tables and stools are too crammed here. It completely goes against fire safety requirements," one of these soldiers complained. So it's true that you became a firefighter after you retired from the army, huh?" Someone beside him asked. "Yeah." "How's that working out for you? Have you been awarded the Meritorious Service Medal?" "Once." "Third class." That man chuckled sheepishly. "That's great. You didn't let your brothers down." Another man came and clapped him on his shoulder. They continued to chat, but Gouffet was still nowhere to be found. "Remove all obstacles," Broken Water Arrow said, proceeding to ask Yi Xiao, "Is that okay?" They were in a system-operated tavern, and the furniture was all arranged by the system. Broken Water Arrow had no idea if the system would mind if they casually removed them, but seeing as Gouffet had already flipped over so many tables, it did not seem that the system cared about it too much. "Whatever you damage, the system will ask for recompense," Yi Xiao answered. "Do you have enough on you?" Broken Water Arrow asked. Yi Xiao hesitated for a while. This tavern was huge, and he was aware of the lion's appetite the system had with such things. Did he really have enough coins on him to pay off everything if they destroyed all this furniture here? "Screw it. Just go ahead with it first," Yi Xiao declared. What would happen if he did not have enough money on him? Most players had no idea about this, but Yi Xiao knew the rules very clearly, and it was not much of a big deal. In fact, if the system intended to take any player's money, was there anything they could do about it? The system would simply take it directly from a player's pocket, so if the sum happened to be insufficient, it would simply take what was owed when the player had any coin until the payment was paid back in full. What could anyone do against it? Broken Water Arrow nodded to the others to give the go-ahead, and everyone proceeded to move all the tables to one side as they searched for where Gouffet could be. As such, the empty space increased, making it much more difficult for Gouffet to play a game of cat and mouse with them. "Where are these guys from?" Players crowding a corner of the tavern whispered this to one another, discussing about the scene before them. "I've never seen any of them before." There was a self-proclaimed local celebrity among these onlookers, yet this person could not recognize even one of these players. "I think I heard them yell out grenade when that mage cast his spell," another added. "Ha ha. How very interesting. Who's that person they are chasing? He killed 2 warriors with 1 twin incineration. Who do you think? 1,000 miles drunk? Who else could it be? Ah, that guy's my idol. Do any of you see where he's now hiding?" "Nope." "After that blink, I don't know where he's now." These players continued their chatter even as they tried to find any traces of Gouffet hiding among the furniture as well. The ex-soldiers continued their careful search, moving the furniture to the side as they went, and they managed to clear out a sizable space in the tavern as a result. Some players, who had just entered the tavern, were thunderstruck at the sight, uncertain of what was happening. Not having any space for them to drink was no big deal, at least it was nothing compared to being unable to find any spot to grind, so their mood was not particularly affected by this. Instead, they stayed around just so they could see what these people were doing. Gradually, those loitering about in the corners of this tavern increased. Finally, the search these ex-soldiers were undertaking was nearing its end. All that was left was just the enclosed area, and there was no need to move any more furniture. Anybody could tell at a glance that there was absolutely no one there. Gouffet was nowhere in sight, and the search for his whereabouts also ended. Yet he was still nowhere to be found. Just where did he go? Could he have been killed off by the two of us before? Old Lightning and Thunder wondered. Did anyone see a flash of white light? Broken Water Arrow asked the people around them, for he had not seen it. Nope. Everyone shook their heads. The white light might have been enveloped by the flames lighting up as a result of the spell, someone said. It was just 4 AO spells. Even if all of them struck that man, he couldn't possibly die from just that, right? Broken Water Arrow asked Yixiao. He was far more of an expert when it came to such calculations. He shouldn't be dead, Yixiao affirmed. He knew how much spell damage Old Lightning and Thunder could do, and having kept an eye on Gufei for such a long time, he was very familiar with his stats and equipment. There was simply no way for Old Lightning and Thunder to finish off Gufei with just the 4 spells. Actually, do either of you have any park value on you? Yixiao asked an even simpler question. The two instantly realized this and shook their heads. No. If he's not dead, did he perhaps use his Windchaser's emblem? Broken Water Arrow asked. Cool Apple's camped out there, and he hasn't seen him appear. Yixiao had long taken precautions for that. Strange. Broken Water Arrow was stumped. That was when Sniper God came forward and whispered something to the two. The look of surprise on either man was telling. In the meantime, the other ex-soldiers had finished their search of the entire tavern and turned up empty-handed. Just as they were lost on what to do next, Broken Water Arrow suddenly messaged on the mercenary channel. Everyone, take note. Our target might very well be mixed in the crowd. They were all stunned by this revelation. They had not bothered any of the onlooking players all this while, allowing them free movement inside the tavern. It was just that everyone was too preoccupied with what they were doing, so no one had cluelessly demanded to take up the space to drink. These players had either left the premises or were standing by the corners of this tavern, watching the spectacle unfold. At the moment, players were filling up all the walls of the tavern, and that was indeed somewhere they had not paid attention to this whole time. It was still entirely possible for Gufei to use his blink while he was hiding in his second position to mix himself in the crowd. Everyone already had their hearts set on this assumption, yet none of them reflected that on the surface. Instead, they acted as if they had concluded that Gufei escaped, and those men originally guarding the entrance stepped forth, looking as if they were about to leave. They're faking it. The man beside Gufei quietly whispered this to him. They're pretending to leave and just waiting for you to show yourself to catch you off guard. You can tell that, too. Not bad. Gufei was indeed hiding out in the crowd. There was no way he could avoid being discovered by the people around him when he reappeared, but all these onlookers fortunately did not mind escalating the spectacle. Besides, seeing Gufei contending all alone with this troop of players without knowing about the issue between these two parties, they would of course favor the underdog Gufei, the seemingly weaker party. As a result, when he mixed in the crowd to hide among them, the players in the know secretly smirked, not one saying a word. This was especially true for this man speaking to Gufei right now. They started conversing right from the start, happily chatting away all this while. Hearing Gufei praise him, the man pouted his mouth in disdain. With only 2 entrances, and you're neither dead nor gone, anyone with half a brain could guess that you're still hanging around. You're showing your ignorance here. There's no guarantee that I'll still be here even if no one sees me leave or die, Gufei said. Then, what else can you do? The man asked. Take a look at this. Gufei showed him his Windchaser's emblem. I've completed a bounty mission here, so all I have to do is activate this, and I can teleport right out of here. How did you get that? This man's eyes widened. How long did it take for you to complete 100 bounty mission? That man's eyes were even wider after hearing Gufei's explanation. To most people, the bounty mission was entirely a thankless task, so no one would willingly do it if not for the need to clear their park points. This man Gufei was speaking had not had the honor of getting any park points on himself despite playing this game for so long. Alright, enough chattering. They're about to leave. Gufei began to squeeze his way out of the crowd. What are you doing? The man was shocked. Accumulate park points, Gufei said as he dashed out, when a cluster of white light suddenly appearing inside the tavern, leaving everyone extremely astonished. The most common reason for this flash of white light to appear was when players disappear, and for it to emerge somewhere without anyone around, that was only something players would see in designated log-off zones when someone got online. After all, a teleportation scroll was not that common, and it was not a sight people could witness everywhere. Meanwhile, Yixiao and the others were feigning retreat, and those thieves lying in wait had of course been planning to spring a surprise attack after they cancelled their stealth. The others leaving the tavern also took note of what was happening inside the tavern at the moment, and plenty of them stopped in their tracks when they saw the cluster of white light appear, gawking at the sight. Chapter 629, Can you send me back? The ex-soldiers had a really nimble reaction. When they saw this strange white light appear out of nowhere, they cared not who this was, and the first thing they did was fan out and surround the person. Following which, some of those who had left the tavern came barreling right back in. No one knew who was in that flash of white light, nor could they confirm if that was not Gu Fei. Could he have accidentally logged out? Yi Xiao wondered. Talking about the performance of parallel world servers was redundant. Even with recent technological advancements, there was no way to account for all the natural disasters and other serendipitous incidents. Stuff like suddenly losing power or getting disconnected from the internet. It would be far stranger for people not to be forcefully logged out when such things happened. The white light very quickly dissipated. Yi Xiao and his men nearly mistook the man inside the light for Gu Fei and almost opened fire, had they not happened to catch a glimpse of the person's equipment. Taking a closer look, everyone could tell that, while this person was very similar to Gu Fei, he was definitely not the man. Meanwhile, after this man appeared and saw that a bunch of people were pointing bows and crossbows at him, he took stock of his foreign surroundings and subsequently showed a confounded look. Yi Xiao and his men muttered to themselves, "There's no doubt this person isn't 1,000 miles drunk, but why does this newcomer look so much like him? Isn't his sudden appearance here a bit too much of a coincidence?" Just as they were uncertain on what to do, they saw someone squeeze out from a corner of the tavern and wave at the man slowly being revealed by the vanishing white light. "How did you get here?" When this person heard Gu Fei's voice, he turned to ask, "Where is this place?" Even Gu Fei was a little confused by his question, staring at him. "Are you still drowsy?" This man's expression did indeed look sleepy as he blankly checked his surroundings once again. There was no reason for Yi Xiao and the others to waste their time listening to Gu Fei's conversation with this newcomer, so the moment they saw Gu Fei appear from the crowd, a single command was all it took for them to ruthlessly open fire at him once more. Since Gu Fei dared to step out in the open, he was obviously mentally prepared for this and quickly somersaulted backward and ducked behind a table for cover. With all the tables stacked together in a corner, everything was all the more concentrated, so he did not need to flip the tables any longer for him to disappear from sight. These ex-soldiers were all in tears. They only had one thought in their heads: "There's just no way to escape our mistakes." These ex-soldiers were prepared to rush Gu Fei even as they saw that he and the newcomer knew each other. They began worrying that the person would lend a hand if they attacked, so several of them turned their ranged weapons over to him. This person was visibly dissatisfied with this. Glancing at these people with their weapons pointed at him, he said, "What are you targeting me for?" "He's right over there." Gu Fei was facing another round of bombardment from old lightning and thunder when this man pointed at him. Poking his head out from within the flames, he said, "Gu Xian, you're too much of a hypocrite. You don't have to sell me out even if you're not here to help." Gu Xian was unfazed by this accusation and just calmly made his way over to one of the tavern's walls amid a flurry of arrows. Upon realizing that he did not plan to lend a hand to Gu Fei, these ex-soldiers naturally disregarded him as an enemy, and even got worried about the man when they saw him boldly walk in the line of fire. Just as the ex-soldier saw that Gu Xian was about to be hit by an arrow in flight, the former was just about to shout, "Be careful," when he ended up witnessing the latter casually swung his hand out, plucking the arrow mid-flight before tossing it to the side as he continued onward. Everybody in the tavern was now regarding this strange man, who had suddenly appeared from thin air, with shock. Gu Fei also felt plenty of emotions when he saw this scene from behind the pile of tables. Logically speaking, Gu Xian did not practice any kung fu, so he should not have such a quick reaction. But it just so happened that the man was born with quick reaction time. Why else would he be hailed as a genius? Still, That move he had executed just then shows that his reaction time had indeed seen an improvement. With this thought in mind, Gu Fei poked his head out again and shouted, "That's some reaction you've got there. It's all thanks to this game, yeah?" These ex-soldiers were on the verge of having a fainting fit. Gu Fei had actually left his original hiding place behind that pile of tables, as he was now poking his head out from a different spot behind the pile of table. Poor old Lightning and Thunder were still blanketing that prior area with their spells. Gu Xian ignored Gu Fei. Walking over to find a player who was busy watching the spectacle, he asked, "Where is this place?" "White Foam Tavern." This person answered even as he curiously regarded Gu Xian. "I mean what city I am in," Gu Xian clarified. "Beishi City." "Damn!" Gu Xian angrily cursed before turning to look at Yixiao and his bunch. These people were once more fanning out in preparation of completely surrounding Gu Fei in a circle, but in order to prevent the man from slipping into the crowd again, they asked the players near the corners of the tavern for their cooperation. Gu Xian watched this as he asked someone standing next to him, "Who are those guys?" "I don't know." Since Gu Xian could not get an answer, he simply shouted, "Gu Fei, what trouble have you gotten yourself into again? Can't you be more discreet?" Before he heard Gu Fei's answer, Yixiao's heart raced. "That person hasn't called Thousand Miles Drunk Jian but Gu Fei. Is that Thousand Miles Drunk's real name? If that's the case, there's no reason this man won't lend a hand since they know each other in real life." The modern era was changing with every passing day, and even though online gaming became more and more accepted in society, the friendship people forged online might not be as close as those in real life. Meanwhile, friends in real life were bound to see much of each other. Take a colleague for example. Even if two colleagues had a passable relationship, if one asked the other for help, and the latter refused, everyone would feel awkward the next day, and that would be unconducive to building a good rapport between them. Even if the other was a really hated superior, there was essentially no choice but to lend a hand. The rapport formed through online games might be far more emotionally pure, while the interpersonal relationship found between people in real life would often be intermingled with pros and cons, so there was really no way to compare the two. Thus, when Yixiao realized that Gu Fei and Gu Xian knew each other in real life, he immediately did not dare to let his guard down. "This man pulled the arrow out in mid-flight moments ago. Is that something any normal person can do? Could it be?" Yixiao gazed at Gu Xian, while he could not see where Gu Fei was. His voice could be heard from another pile of tables, making it seem like it was a voice-over for the inanimate object as he gave Gu Xian a quick rundown. "That man is called Fleeting Smile. He's a game employee. He claims that I'm affecting the game balance, so he's here to rectify me." "Fleeting Smile? Which one is he?" Gu Fei only voiced out Fleeting Smile's IGN but did not point him out, so Gu Xian still had no idea who he was even after hearing all that. All he saw was someone staring right at him, so he could not help but stare back at Yixiao. "Are you the one?" Yixiao nodded. "Game employee, huh?" Gu Xian walked over. "Then, let me would give this game of yours a suggestion." "Ha ha." Yixiao was wary of the newcomer, but he was still unprepared for Gu Xian to make his way over to him. However, the statement he just made was unexpected, and this moment of shock allowed Gu Xian to continue. "I agree with the punishment of losing proficiency, level, and money when players forcefully log off, but you can't just teleport me randomly like this. I forcefully logged out over at Xiao City, yet I actually came online herein." "Which city is it again?" Gu Xian turned to ask the player he had spoken to from before. "Beishi City," the person blankly answered. "Beishi City? Yeah. Why in the world am I suddenly here in Beishi City? Why would forcefully logging out result in this? Have you guys ever made a statement about this? I've never once met this issue forcefully logging off every day. Just what is going on? How many cities away am I from Xiao City?" The distance between cities was more or less the same, so the term city was used to denote the distance between two cities. One city would just be the distance between two cities, and two cities would naturally mean that there was another city in the middle between two cities. "3 cities. Yixiao answered. "3 cities? Fucking hell." Gu Xian was already right before Yixiao at this point, and he blew a gasket the moment he heard the answer. Gu Xian's hand shot out and gripped Yi Xiao by his neck, randomly teleporting players 3 cities away. Do you guys even have any sense of responsibility? Yours truly has been forcefully logging out every day precisely because I don't want to walk far. Yet now you're asking me to travel over 3 cities just to return to Xiao City. Are you looking to get yourself killed? Gu Xian bellowed. His IGN wind court was acknowledged as within the ranks of the 10 great adepts for the fighter job class, and he was one of the top experts in this game. Yi Xiao, who was just a fragile priest, was being wrung like a chicken by Gu Xian's vice grip around his neck. Yi Xiao's face was draining color fast. This person had started off this conversation by saying he was giving a suggestion, yet Yi Xiao never could have foreseen to be in such a situation as a result. For them to fall out so abruptly. They were having such a peaceful chat moments ago. Fuck. My HP is dropping. Yi Xiao discovered that this fighter was exerting force around his neck with this choke, and it dealt the slightest amount of damage as his windpipes got crushed. Worse was the unbearably suffocating sensation he had as Gu Xian kept his hold around his neck. Broken Water Arrow and the others were not too far from Yi Xiao, yet never did they expect this person to dash forth and try to murder him so abruptly. The ingrained mentality of these ex-soldiers appeared yet again. No one began firing at Gu Xian in the first moment and, instead, had their arms out, gesturing for him to calm down. Don't act trashly. The formation they originally had ringing Gu Fei rapidly changed. In the blink of an eye, Gu Xian became the focal point of their encirclement. Gu Fei stood up from behind the pile of tables and showed much confusion as he looked at the scene before him. Is it actually useful to hold someone hostage? This one utterance from him reminded Broken Water Arrow and the others that they were in a game, and players who died would only just get revived. So what use was there to take someone as hostage like this? Everyone immediately prepared to mount a rescue on the hostage after they thought of this. Gu Xian could tell what these men were planning and hurriedly extended his hand out to stop them. Wait a moment, I've still got things to say. Everybody subconsciously came to a stop. Gu Xian continued asking Yi Xiao, if I let you go, is there any way that you can send me back to the location I logged out from last time? Obviously, such a thing was impossible, especially since Yi Xiao had already resigned from the game company. Moreover, this was the first time he had come across someone's location being tampered with after forcefully logged off. Yi Xiao could easily understand why this person would be so incensed after being teleported 3 cities over. But the problem was what he had gleaned when he heard what the man had just said. He was someone who frequently forcefully logged out, and his equipment, money, levels, and skills had all been confiscated as a result, yet he did not seem to care about any of this. So why was he showing such a temper from this one teleportation? Compared to all those other losses, a mere teleportation did not seem to be that huge of a deal. Yi Xiao was wondering about this, yet he found the grip on his throat slacken as Gu Xian eased off Yi Xiao's windpipes to let the man answer him. Yi Xiao shook his head right away. That's impossible. Forget about Yi Xiao being an ex-employee. If he were still working with a game company, he could not really do it even with the necessary permissions. The players must bear the consequences of them forcefully logging out. This was a staunch stance that the game company emphasized on, and no one would be the exception to this. Broken Water Arrow and the others looked at Gu Xian. They were wondering just what he would say after being given a negative answer. In the end, he did not say a word, merely clutching Yi Xiao's throat anew and tossing him to the side like a piece of trash picked up by the roadside. The priest was sent flying right at a pile of tables in one corner of the room. The crowd's gazes followed Yi Xiao's flight, wanting to see the embarrassing state he would be in after being thrown like that. But who would have thought that a flash of white light would appear the instant he crashed into the tables? Yi Xiao had actually been insta-killed with that throw. The ordinary players were very shocked when they saw this damage from a seismic toss. They did not think that this player, who had randomly appeared, would actually be so powerful. While Gu Xian was indeed powerful, the thought process these ordinary players had were flawed. What made him powerful was his ability to throw in a kick and punch the instant he tossed Yi Xiao. This was something the ordinary players did not notice, but Gu Fei and the other experts present could easily discern what he did with their keen eyes. He Gu Fei shook his head as he flipped out from behind the pile of tables, his disdainful gaze fixed on Gu Xian. It's not good to give in to anger. Gu Xian's expression was surprisingly helpless, heaving a big sigh. 3 cities distance. My heart is already dead. Then, you can just let your slothfulness be the death of you. Gu Fei no longer bothered with the man. His eyes moved to Broken Water Arrow and his men. So, do we continue this? Speaking of which, Gu Fei did not really have any ill will toward this bunch of ex-soldiers, and he could tell that they were all straightforward men with great alacrity. Fleeting Smile was Broken Water Arrow's friend, and the kind of men they were meant that they would naturally fearlessly face all sorts of adversities for their comrades. What they emphasized was the ideal of ages past, something once known as virtue, but was now often mockingly referred to as fidelity by others in today's troubled world. The common people were unable to demonstrate this, which was why they had such criticisms toward it. Attributing it to be a futile concept that did more harm than good, such people would take the high ground in the argument and expound upon the destructiveness that the word had brought. However, even if there was no need for emotions when it came to the law, solely stressing on the rules whatsoever was rather inhumane. Yet that was Parallel World's system. Gu Fei was looking at the group of ex-soldiers, knowing full well in his heart that there was no way that they would give up like this. Sacrificing a comrade was a very painful occurrence to them, but knowing that the comrades they sacrificed in this game would revive at the spawn point immediately, these ex-soldiers actually experienced great happiness from it. It was only that whenever this happened, everyone would end up recalling the losses of their comrades during actual warfare, and they could not help but feel a sudden bout of despondence come to them. Nevertheless, everyone soon corrected their mindset, and after Gu Fei asked that question, all of them quickly raised their crossbows, knocked their bows, and hurled their grenades, launching a concerted attack at Yixiao's murderer. As someone who professed to be of a better caliber in close combat, Mountain Breaker X could tell that Gu Xian was also a martial arts practitioner, and he promptly gave up on engaging at range and bravely pounced straight at the man. Gu Xian and Gu Fei were from the Gu family, so their kung fu were of course similar to each other. Still, there was a huge difference between the two men in this game. Gu Xian had strength, while Gu Fei did not. From this point alone, the fighting styles of these two diverged quite drastically. Mountain Breaker X had also chosen a fighter in this game, so the strength he had was not enough to keep Gu Xian suppressed. The two men exchanged blows, and the scene was very similar to that scene between Eternal Dominion and Mountain Breaker X this morning. But even though Gu Xian understood Kung Fu, he did not exactly physically practice it, so there was no way that he could have developed that deep-rooted mindfulness that Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion demonstrated. Just from how that move he used against Yixiao, wrapping his fingers mercilessly over Yixiao's throat, showed just how very vicious he was when using Kung Fu. Broken Water Arrow was all the more intuitively aware of this particular fact and quickly concluded that the Kung Fu this martial artist possessed was different from Gu Fei's or Eternal Dominion's. This person had no scruples when it came to gouging the eyes, digging the heart, kicking the nether regions and other such taboo moves. Had this fighter executed these attacks in real life, there was a high chance of his opponent ending up becoming an invalid or dead. Mountain Breaker X had already lost to Gu Fei this morning, but after trading blows with each other for several rounds, his understanding of the man deepened, and further fighting with Eternal Dominion had also led him better comprehend Eternal Dominion as well. It was during the process of fighting with Eternal Dominion that made him realize how martial arts practitioners would mostly evade the heavy strikes and deal with the light. Their moves were executed skillful, yet the damage they dealt was low, but his exchange with Gu Fei after refuted his perception of this and defeated him. In any case, because of the hidden grape incident, as well as Gu Fei's final attack, which killed him, was a sudden move that relied on a spell from the game, he was still skeptical toward the prowess of Kung Fu. This skepticism was finally eliminated as that fight with Gu Xian progressed. Gu Xian knew all the moves available in the Gu family, but because he was not one to practice throughout his life, nor would he spar with anyone else, it nationally meant that there was no one to tutor him. Because of this, he did not share the mentality of Eternal Dominion and Gu Fei. He truly used any move in his arsenal whenever he saw it fit to use, neither going easy in the least nor being courteous with his moves. Every move he made went for the kill. After 5 rounds, both men were still evenly matched in both their attack and defense. 10 rounds later, Mountain Breaker X was already on the defensive. By the time they reached round 15, Mountain Breaker X could feel his heart turning cold. Just like Gufei, Mountain Breaker X was the sort that would often think, if this were in real life, what would this be like? It was fine if this was just an occasional thought that crept into his mind, but thinking about this while fighting with Gu Xian only chilled him further. He was almost certain that he would have ended up with broken bones, go blind, lose an ear, or his family jewels in the process if he continued fighting with the man and still managed to survive. This was a fate far more frightening than death. The oppressive zeal that he had when going up against Eternal Dominion was slowly replaced with the chill he felt. Mountain Breaker X finally had a first-hand experience of just how horrifying Kung Fu could be if it focused on actually killing an opponent. He completely believed what Gufei had previously said. What you've grasped was no more than simplified and expedited techniques. You've no time to really comprehend the essence of the moves. 20 rounds later, Mountain Breaker X was finally defeated by Gu Xian. He was seismic tossed away with a raise of the man's arm, albeit this time he was not killed from the fall. Rather, he was used as a weapon that hindered Old Lightning and Thunder by being sent crashing into them. Old Lightning and Thunder temporarily stopped their spell bombardment to avoid this. Gu Xian scornfully glared at the sea of flames the two men had created with their spells. Show some promise, not even daring to come out and deal with the enemies face to face. You've completely thrown what face Gu family has. Shit. I feel that you merely want to take on just one opponent. Gu Fei's voice was actually heard from a different position. These ex-soldiers were frenzied. We've been keeping an eye on him as best as we can already. How did he reposition himself? This blink spell is simply too shameful. How can they have that in a Vermo? It's too illogical. While they could tell that Gu Xian was not any less powerful to Gu Fei, their mission was to deal with Gu Fei at the end of the day, so they had no intention of contending with people unrelated to the task at hand. Thus, they did not really concentrate on attacking Gu Xian, and the rest did not bother lending a hand after Mountain Breaker X made the move to accost the man. With Mountain Breaker X being summarily beaten, and they had no idea where Gu Fei had squirreled himself into, these ex-soldiers had truly found themselves to be in a troublesome situation. Focus on one. Sniper God sent this message over the mercenary channel. Everyone nodded to acknowledge this command and no longer wasted time engaging with the not visible Gu Fei. Everybody turned their arrows at Gu Xian, who was standing out in the open before them. In the end, they saw Gu Xian somersault and deftly land within the pile of tables in the corner. Show some promise. On another end, Gu Fei was holding Gu Xian in deep contempt when he saw how he had done the exact same move he had done minutes before. Chapter 630, Fly, Coin Pouch. Gu Xian cast Gu Fei a side eye. He huddled under the table at the other side after he leapt into the pile of tables. This pile of tables was like the Great Wall as it defended these two men. Broken Water Arrow and the others were standing on the other side of this cordon, flustered in their exasperation, hidden in search. Afraid that Gu Fei would blink out from some unknown corner and insta-kill them, they could only depend on the bombardment from Old Lightning and Thunder for support. However, if they did not approach the target to confirm his hiding place, they would only end up hurling their attacks at the wrong spot. Target that guy first, he doesn't know blink. Provide cover fire and get ready to charge in. Broken Water Arrow commanded. Old Lightning and Thunder acknowledged the order and began tossing out their grenades as they alternated in casting spells. Soon, they created a sea of flames where Gu Xian was hiding. Gu Xian did not know blink, so he was unable to reposition himself without alerting others like Gu Fei could. Broken Water Arrow and his men kept their eyes glued for any movement, not letting even the slightest movement in that forest of furniture escape their watchful gazes. Over there. Sniper God lived up to his name as a top marksman. That keen eyesight of his easily detected a slight movement among the mess of furniture and pointed it out for everyone. Of course, in order not to expose their intentions, he did not vocalize this discovery but sent a message over the mercenary channel. Instead, the others followed where Sniper God was pointing and spotted that movement within the tables and stools, but it soon came to a halt. making it evident that this person had no wish to make too much of a movement and alert the other party in the process. The ex-soldiers were now utilizing hand signals to communicate and setting up their plan thusly. Old Lightning and Thunder continued bombarding the original position as per normal while the others slowly inched nearer and nearer to that position where they had seen movement. "Be careful, they can see you." This was when someone from the crowd of onlookers shouted out this warning. Gufei and Guxian might not know about Broken Water Arrow and his men's plan of diversion by making a den in the east to attack the west, but the crowd watching could see this clearly. Even though they had no idea what the hand signals these ex-soldiers were using, much less even aware what words had been exchanged over the mercenary channel, they could all tell just what they intended to do from observing the actions they had been undertaking from start to finish. These ex-soldiers were extremely dispirited by this. This was the result of not completely clearing the area of operation. With so many people watching, they had no idea just who had shouted this, so all they could do was helplessly toss a dry stare in the general direction. With someone sowing further chaos into this, the ex-soldiers had no choice but to speed up what they were doing. And these people rushing to Guxian could no longer take their time, immediately lunging toward their destination. The two mages Old Lightning and Thunder also instantly changed their area of bombardment over to this new position, each tossing out a spell within the area where their comrades were blitzing. Just from these two spells, anyone could tell that, even though these two men were not good at gaming, their ability to coordinate with each other was something they were quite familiar with. Take these two spells they lobbed out for instance, treating them like grenades when they unleashed their spells respectively. None of their comrades was damaged by its cast as the AO from the spell completely enveloped only the targeted area. A whole troop of men came charging in as if they were ransacking the place, but they were once more left dumbfounded as there was nary a single human in the middle of the furniture. "That's impossible. I'm positive I saw movement." Sniper God was astonished. He had absolute confidence when it came to his eyesight. "Thank goodness you've got such a keen eye." This voice came from beside several men, and Gufei and Guxian suddenly launched their assault in tandem. With the blink spell in his arsenal, Gufei's location was hard to ascertain, and these ex-soldiers did not dare to hope to get a grasp of his position any longer. However, Guxian was exactly where he had been from the time he somersaulted into the forest of furniture. As it turned out, the fighter did not budge in the least, and it was unknown what method he had used to create that slight movement elsewhere. "We're the ones who fell for their diversion." These ex-soldiers were in tears. They were the ones who wanted to divert Guxian and Jiafei's attention by making noise in the east to mount an attack to the west, but who would have thought that they were the ones who would be diverted by the enemy. Instead, the two men that had come barreling out from the pile of tables did not bother to attack these unlucky men but split to the left and right respectively and bolted out of the tavern. Gufei horizontally lashed his sword out, executing a 720-degree twin incineration as he came drifting out. As the ex-soldiers guarding the door knew Gufei's spell damage was so powerful to the point that the barest touch it would instantly cause death, none of them had the guts to take it head on, so they were left with no choice but to try dodging the strike. Some even thought to find out if there was any pause that they could exploit to directly take down Gufei, but his pirouette was incomparably fluid. The flames that circled out hallowed even more perfectly than a ring of fire. By the time the fiery glow subsided, Gufei had already twirled his way out of the premises. Over by the other door, Guxian was all the more elegant than Gufei. After running out from that pile of tables, he randomly borrowed a nearby chair and stepped on it. Directly flying out and over, Guxian intended to glide past the two men standing guard by the door. But why would either man let him leave so easily, though? Together, they reached out their hands in an effort to snatch him out of the air. But Guxian, who had been sailing straight in the air, abruptly dipped vertically halfway through. His single leg swept the man on the right as his other hand grabbed hold of the man on the left, heaving him toward the other pursuers behind him before darting right at the door himself. That. Everyone was rooted to the spot as they watched the two players escape. The ex-soldiers were able to hold their own when it came to actual close combat, but their understanding of skills and its uses in the game were still fairly weak, to the point that they could not even compete against the majority of the average gamers out there. At the moment, The mages were all singing astonished praises of how magnificently Goofy had undulated out the door with a twin incineration, while the fighters were beside themselves with shock at how Guxian had used his skills when making his getaway. Guxian's act of boosting his jump by stepping on that chair was not just any ordinary move, but he had also activated his fighter skill, Spurring Meteor. In the process, he then proceeded to cancel the skill in mid-flight with great precision, unleashing a swallow dropkick that let him abruptly descend like he did. The seismic toss that followed looked rather ordinary, but that player who had been thrown out keenly understood that grab Guxian did perfectly accommodated to the angle of the ex-soldier's impetus, making it impossible for him to avoid it. Sniper God was feeling abnormally melancholic when he saw the two men get away. The fact that it was due to his eyesight being too good that caused him this misjudgment only made it all the more infuriating for him. He turned to look at the place where Guxian was originally hiding and was stunned for a good moment before he suddenly asked, "Old Lightning and Thunder have bombarded that spot with spells. How did that guy even survive through all that without moving? Just how much HP does he have?" This was a question about the game, and none of them present had any idea about the game algorithm on such matters, so all of them was stumped. Broken Water Arrow, who had spent the longest time playing the game out of the team, found this to be strange too. When Old Lightning and Thunder were hurling their spells endlessly, the damage they had done in total should have been enough to kill anyone who had toughed it out and stood through all that fire. As everyone mulled over this question, Broken Water Arrow sent a message to consult with Yeezy, but they soon heard someone in the crowd snickering audibly. The spectacle might have ended, but these onlookers remained to appreciate the embarrassment Broken Water Arrow's lot was showing for their mistake. This was like a comical ending after a huge climax, and not watching it until the end would be quite the loss. These onlookers continued to discuss the recently concluded battle, and that person who had snickered glanced at the ex-soldiers as he pointed at Guxian's previous hiding spot, animatedly discussing what happened with the person beside him. Broken Water Arrow and the others saw where the person was standing and immediately knew those standing there had perfect sight of what Guxian had been doing while he was hiding. The ex-soldiers could all tell that they were not particularly favored by the majority of those watching the fight. They would most likely end up rubbing the crowd the wrong way if they directly asked them to explain. Broken Water Arrow made eye contact, and a thief understood what he wanted. Activating his stealth, he went over to eavesdrop on the players' discussion even as he related everything he learned on the mercenary channel. They were all vomiting blood when they learned the truth. It turned out that Guxian had hooked his limbs to the legs of the table when he was being assailed by the spells. As such, the descending wheel of flames that came from above was blocked by the surface of the table, while the blazing tree of 1,000 inferno that sprouted from the ground did not make contact with him, so he took no damage during the entire ordeal. That's just too rascally of him. Old Lightning and Thunder were speechless when they heard this answer. They were all older men, so they ended up settling on the word like rascally to describe the childishness of the young man's action. The others could only grimace as they exchanged looks. They now understood that a game was a game, and real life was just that. Not mentioning Blink, even a lousy table could block and survive their seemingly outrageously powerful spells. Then there was also what Guxian had done as he made his escape. Just the skill cancellation alone let him ignore the laws of physics as he completely changed his trajectory in midair. These were all things that could not happen in real life. A fall in a pit, a gain in the wind. All we can do is learn from our mistakes. Broken Water Arrow said. Old Broken, you've played longer than we did. Someone mentioned. I'm getting on in years, I simply can't compete with the youngsters. Broken Water Arrow meekly replied. It looks like we're really getting old. Everyone was in low spirits. They were just a band of old and retired soldiers, with their age up front for all to see, even though the game could allow them to relive the strength and dexterity they had in their youth. They were very helpless at their capacity to adapt to fresh things and other cognitive concepts. This could be seen as the anguish for anyone getting on in years. The young would always be quicker at picking up new things. Let's make a move first. Just as these crestfallen ex-soldiers prepared to leave, the door was pushed open, and Goofy poked his head through and looked at them. What's the matter? What's holding you guys up for so long? The ex-soldiers were all rooted. The onlookers were also stunned. From what Goofy said, Did that mean that he had actually been waiting for them outside this whole time? Did they not do all that just so that they could escape from the tavern? You. These ex-soldiers had no idea what to say. Come out quickly, the little space inside gets in the way too much. Let's come out and fight, Goofy urged. Attaboy. I admire you just a little. Sniper God perked up almost instantly. He rolled up his sleeves and got ready to do battle once more. But this was when someone suddenly appeared before him to stop him from leaving the tavern. After exchanging a few words, everyone could hear Sniper God blurt out with a bewildered look on his face, "What pay for damages with that?" He walked around this person a few rounds checking him out before asking, "Are you a NPC?" The NPC most likely had never heard such a stupid question before, for had no proper response to this question, a stark contrast from the intelligent AI the game company touted. It was instead the crowd that now burst into raucous laughter. Of course, that person was a NPC. It was the NPC in charge of receiving the patrons in this tavern. How could there be someone that did not recognize it? Broken Water Arrow gave a mirthless chuckle. He was the one who had pulled all these old buddies of his into the game to help out, and they had been spending their time zealously leveling out in the wilds the moment they started. Even those few party quests that Ezio had organized were all settled by the man himself, and all his comrades did was run errands and fight monsters. Their life here in Parallel World was very simple and plain, so much so that they had not even interacted with any NPC before this. In fact, this was the first time they had visited a tavern. Broken Water Arrow did not feel a bit embarrassed that Sniper God was being made a joke of. Rather, he felt a little contrite. There was a lot of content to the game, yet his comrades had only focused on grinding monsters to level up since they started playing Parallel World. They had completely forewent any sort of entertainment solely to help him with this task. Yeah, we need to pay for damages. Broken Water Arrow patted Sniper God's shoulder. How much? I don't have any money. Sniper God had a very unabashed look on him. Broken Water Arrow quickly recalled how when he and his comrades were playing cards back in the days, even though gambling was strictly prohibited, everyone would still have a little wager privately, and this man would always shamelessly refuse to pay up every time he lost. This sum, it might be quite a lot. Goofy's head was still poking out from behind the door, and he interjected to this conversation when he saw what was happening. It could be said that he was experienced when it came to the issue of tavern claims. Plenty of his bounty mission would have him visiting taverns and breaking tables, stools, and chairs. Goofy had no clue about the rules of the system, but most of the time, he would be asked to pay for damages. Player-run taverns like Ray's Bar were not too bad. He simply had to help clean up and pay a token sum, and the proprietor would not seek to make things difficult for him. As a player-operated business, it was important for them to emphasize on peace to bring in the money. However, when facing a system-operated tavern, the only language spoken was that of the almighty coin, and there was no room for accommodations. Goofy was quick and vicious with his attacks, and he could often insta-kill his bounties without much of a fuss. The highest record he had was breaking 3 tables. But what these old army veterans had done was far more overbearing. They made a huge mess of the tavern, moving the furniture from its place, and this was also a rather large tavern to boot. There was no tavern of this size in Yunjuan City, so even Goofy had no idea how much the final bill would be when talking of claims and compensation. How much are we talking about? The bunch of them did not bother acknowledging Goofy as they asked Sniper God. The NPC had been talking to him just now. Actually, everyone had plenty of questions floating in their minds, such as what would happen if everyone had another round of Park and Die. Would this NPC come chasing them over to the spawn point and ask them to pay? What if everyone forcefully logged out the game and never come back? Would this become their bad debt? How much? I forgot. How much is it? Sniper God asked the NPC again. 3,216 gold coins, 14 silver coins, and 54 copper coins, the NPC announced. Everyone's breath hitched. No one thought that the system would be so black-hearted. There was no way of knowing just how this sum was calculated, so everyone could only pity the ex-soldiers this time around. How enjoyable could offending the system get? These men did not seem to be very wealthy, so there was no knowing if they could even scrape together 3,000 gold coins. What would happen if they could not do so? Everyone had never come across such a situation before, and an intense discussion began. "Anyone has any money?" Sniper God asked. Everyone was looking up at the ceiling. They had only been focused on leveling after entering the game, so where would they get that much coin? What money they earned from their monster grind were just the spare copper coins that did not amount to much. The players nowadays see those as no more than trash, and there were plenty of players who would not even bother to pick those up. The more cynical players were now looking at how Goofy was seemingly behaving as if he were uninvolved as he picked a fight with these men. They skeptically wondered if he was shameless enough to have calculated the penniless background of these men into the equation. The hatred for the rich was a mentality many had, so quite a few people began to have an unfavorable opinion of Goofy at this very moment. "What's going to happen if you don't have the money? Can you leave?" Goofy asked. "You." Everyone was speechless. A sum of over 3,000 gold coins was definitely substantial. Goofy would have shared the same sentiment had this been several days ago. Now, even though he had only taken a few bags of gold coins from his efficient monster grinding routine earnings, as long as the sum was in the single digits of the thousands, it was no longer something he would be short of. Seeing these men caught in such an embarrassing predicament, Goofy casually pulled out a bag of gold coins from his dimensional pocket. "Pay it off first." The crowd was left dumbfounded once again. This bag of coins went flying to Sniper God. Caught unprepared, the man instinctively grabbed the bag but then saw how his comrades looked at him and hurriedly tossed it back. "Don't need it." The onlookers' eyes nearly fell out of their sockets as they watched this bag containing several thousand gold coins get tossed back and forth like this. They simply could not make sense of these two parties' relationship. Were they enemies? Would enemies so forthrightly pull out several thousand gold coins like this? "Just take it. I recently struck gold. I have so much money I have trouble spending it," Goofy said even as he tossed it back at Sniper God. Most people would sound very modest and humble when talking about something like making a fortune, yet that was not how Goofy sounded. Adding that remark of his, it simply made him sound like a nouveau riche. Even if he did not think much about money, his previous image to this crowd was subverted by his hands. The bag of money flew over, and Sniper God seized it once more. He did not even wait for his comrades to stare at him and just sent it flying back to Goofy, resolutely refusing. "No need." "Then, what do we do about this?" Goofy scratched his head. These ex-soldiers were exasperated. "This isn't any of your business, yeah? I've been waiting for you guys for so long already," Goofy grumbled. "Come on in, we can fight here," the ex-soldiers said. "I can't unleash inside. Besides, I would have to pay for damages if I make a mess of things, too," Goofy stated. The eyes of these ex-soldiers dimmed when Goofy said that. When all was said and done, there was just no way around this matter. Broken Water Arrow hurriedly sent a message to Yixiao detailing what had happened. Yixiao was on his way back even as they corresponded, and learning that over 3,000 gold coins was within his capacity to pay, Broken Water Arrow could sigh in relief at last. When Yixiao asked him about the situation on their end, Broken Water Arrow had no idea how to answer him. What could he tell him? Tell him how Goofy originally escaped but returned and was now chatting them up, even going as far as to offer to lend them money? When the onlookers saw that this matter was not over, those who were about to leave came to a halt again. Still, there were some who ran and circled around the tavern exterior, believing that the two men had surely set up a trap since they were so determined to continue the park in a wider arena. In the end, after circling the establishment, all they saw was the fighter from before squatting outside, and there was nothing else anywhere that hinted otherwise. Could there be a large number of thieves in stealth? These onlookers muttered to themselves. Some continued walking around while feeling the air everywhere, and others ran back into the tavern. Time passed by. Suddenly, one of the onlookers outside came in. He was looking at the ex-soldiers, wanting to say something, yet afraid of saying a word. He turned to the other players, who were also here for the spectacle, and announced that priest from before came back, but he got killed off by that fighter outside the moment he reached the front door. What? Broken Water Arrow and the others were all stunned. Did that not mean that the situation they were in was akin to being stuck in the front lines of this tavern as their supply lines were cut off? Just as they were at a loss on what to do, Gu Xian pushed open the door and came in, wholly unsatisfied. Why aren't you guys out yet? Why did you kill off Fleeting Smile? Gu Fei asked. I'll let him run to his death. Gu Xian said. With that, he asked, is the Priest Academy very far from here? Not far at all, someone answered, causing Gu Xian to express visible disappointment. Since you have so much resentment, I do have a way to help you return, Gu Fei suddenly said. Oh, you've got a solution? Gu Xian quickly asked. I can kill you, Gu Fei replied.